Are there any areas in Pokemon you haven't been to? I'm not talking about the ones in games you haven't played, but the optional areas and ones you have played. Maybe you meant to do it later and forgot about it. You intended to return after going to the Pokemon Center and it just slipped your mind. Maybe you never even knew it existed. It's so off to the side it never even crossed your mind to explore that way. These are the areas less traveled. Areas that are off the beaten path and that the average player probably overlooks. They're not completely unknown, mind you, but you might have to jog someone's memory to have a conversation about them. They're forgettable, they're hard to get to, or they're just not worth stopping by. That is the topic of today's video, and we'll be exploring a few with the expectation of visiting some more in the future. I've covered places like this in the past, such as the abandoned ship, but for today I'll be sticking to places I haven't covered before. For now, sit back, relax, and let's go to the areas less traveled. Fuego Ironworks is an area that's mystified me for a long time. It's the only place in this video that I'm 100% confident in calling less traveled, because even the NPCs within are shocked that anyone would make the trip out. No story plays out here, and nothing is necessary. Even to get the national dex, there are alternatives to catching the exclusive wild Pokemon here. It epitomizes the type of area that used to feel underexplored in a pair of games, that then gets revisited and recontextualized in the definitive third version that Pokemon games had through the first 4 generations. But it wasn't revisited. I was shocked that nothing significant had really changed from Diamond and Pearl to Platinum. There are changes, yes, but I wouldn't really classify any of them as making Fuego Ironworks a must-visit location. It's like putting lipstick on a Grumpig. Sure, it looks prettier, but it's still a Grumpig at the end of the day. In Platinum, one can get shards from Mr. Fuego in exchange for star pieces, but it's so much of a pain to get them, why bother? In the time it takes the star pieces to respawn in Iron Island, you could dig up dozens of shards underground. Granted, this is a good way to guarantee one of each, but I've always had a surplus because of how much time I've spent digging for things like evolution stones. Which reminds me, Fuego Ironworks is one of the places where some of the finite fire stones in Sinnoh can be found. One in this corner, and one from Mr. Fuego and Diamond and Pearl and their remakes only. But again, you can just dig them up underground. Oh, and even if you had 20, there'd be nothing to use them on because, as I'm sure you've heard, Sinnoh has no fire types, much less ones that utilize the Firestone to evolve. That's probably why they reduced the amount you get here in Platinum. In Diamond and Pearl, there was actually nothing to use a Firestone on prior to beating the Elite Four. Platinum added an Eevee. One of the most baffling things that Diamond and Pearl did was give 24 Pokemon new evolutions, and then put those Pokemon that they evolved from in the post-game, if at all. Whether or not the developers realized this was something they wanted to go back on or not, they did change things up for Platinum. The aggressively Sinnoh lineup of Shinx, Luxio, Pachirisu, Shellos, Gastrodon, and Floatzel is reduced, and supplemented with Magnemite and Magmar, which are about 1 billion times more fitting for a steel mill. Many areas received similar changes to their encounter table in Platinum, many of them as drastic as the Ironworks, but I will say that none feel as jarring before the change. Other routes like 221 I don't bat an eye at, any table is fitting. The Ironworks in Diamond and Pearl feel like an afterthought. Nothing is exclusive, and in fact it's just a higher level version of its access route. The Ironworks are weird to even get to. It becomes available after you get Surf, at which point you can take the river on Route 205 north. It's a pain to travel to with the slow surf speed of Diamond and Pearl, but what isn't? It was increased in Platinum, so clearly it was identified as an issue. The Ironworks are a rare example of industry being acknowledged in the Pokemon games. The shops are stocked, nobody starves, and we just don't think about it. Fuego Ironworks is where iron is refined and machine parts are produced for the entire Sinnoh region. It's filled with spin tiles that can make the works confusing to traverse, but that's really only if you overthink it. Pretty straightforward if you can put aside memories of the rocket bases. Now that I mention it, Fuego Ironworks stands out as one of the few places with spin tiles that isn't associated with the evil teams. Funnily, Mr. Fuego has a meta comment about how he added the tiles to this place, and no one liked it. I actually kinda like puzzles like this. I'm awful at the ice ones though. I can't put my finger on it, but this just isn't a place to hang out. I don't know how else to explain my unease than this. Fuego Ironworks feels like the type of area you'd see in grainy footage from a Gen 3 ROM hack back in the day. It's plausible enough that it makes you wonder if it's real. That's the sort of vibe I get from Fuego Ironworks. But this is a real place, and it's weird. And I like it. This next one is a little bit, shall we say, situational. This entry is half of Shoal Cave. Which half specifically? Whichever one your copy of Ruby, Sapphire, or Emerald didn't get stuck on when the battery ran dry and the in-game clock stopped. For those who don't know, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald rely on a battery within the cartridge to keep track of in-game time, among other things. When it runs out, all sorts of things happen, such as berries not growing, but your save file is fine. This is in contrast to the Generation 1 and 2 games, in which the save file is connected to the battery, and your save file is lost when the battery runs dry. Again, in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, the only thing that stops is time. And if you didn't know, Shoal Cave is an area that's unique in that its layout changes depending on the time. For half of the day, it's full of water, and shoal shells can be collected. The other half, it's drained, and you can collect shoal salt. 4 of each, and this old man will make you a shell bell, a useful held item that restores HP equal to part of the damage your Pokemon deals. Meaning, if you don't know how to replace a Hoenn Games battery, you could be locked out of this useful held item. More than that though, it's possible your cartridge has an unobtainable Pokemon. The Ice Room, accessible via the Low Tide map, is the only source of Snorunt in the main series Gen 3 games. So if your file's in-game clock froze at high tide, you need to trade over a Snorunt, or replace the battery. I mean, it's super easy, I've done it myself and I'm an idiot. But isn't that an interesting thought? A potentially unobtainable Pokemon, and it's not an event mythical or something like that. It's hard-coded in, it's not a version exclusive, and there's no tricks to find it. It's a regular Pokemon who can't be found if, pun intended, your game froze at the wrong time. I'm not sure there's another Pokemon with this distinction, because unlike something such as, say, Island Scan Pokemon, where theoretically they're unobtainable if your 3DS camera breaks, battery failure is an inevitability for all Gen 3 Hoenn games. I would be shocked if there's still a cartridge out there that hasn't suffered a dry battery in the past 2 decades. This means that likely half of all original Hoenn cartridges can't obtain Snorunt without a soldering iron. I was one of them. I myself had no idea Snorunt was in Shoal Cave, because my childhood file froze at high tide. And this was only like 5 years after the games first came out. I couldn't figure out how to make the tide go down for years because I was just some kid. I remember seeing videos on YouTube in the late 2000s where people showed off how to catch Snorunt, and I thought they were hoaxes like Mew3. I assumed I was doing something wrong, and kind of just let Snorunt go because I didn't like it that much. Nor was I a Pokédex completionist until about half a decade later when Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were announced. I just didn't care about Snorunt. I liked Spheal a lot more, and it can be found in Shoal Cave during high and low tide. But if my preferences were reversed, I would have been out of luck. This is actually the first time I've been down here doing the ice puzzle and searching for Snorunt somehow. Ignore how incompetent I am. Probably because of the changing nature of the cave, people are almost entirely absent from it. There's no trainers to fight, unlike other caves in Hoenn. The old man who makes the shell bell is a constant, but when the water level is low, this black belt offering a focus band can be found. He seems to have figured out the timing of the tide, because he's back here every day to do whatever it is he does. Shoal Cave has a very cool concept. Oddly enough, I kind of associate it with things like the PSS and the GTS, and that somewhere in the back of the developers' minds, they must have known it wasn't going to last forever. But unlike these online services, Shoal Cave is an explorable place. It's honestly kind of worse than places like New Moon or Southern Island that are accessed through decades-old events. At least those places are normally inaccessible. You always lose access to one half of Shoal Cave just due to time. And if you're unlucky, it gets stuck at high tide. I don't think Shoal Cave gets talked about nearly enough when discussions about obsolete features come up, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. It's just an interesting talking point for a video. You've probably been to Route 123 in Hoenn. It's accessible via Route 118 and is the home of the Berry Master couple. Those of you who are into contests have probably made dozens of trips here for free berries. Their lawn is also one of the best spots to grow berries in the entire region. But this video is about the areas less traveled, so let's talk about the part of it that's less traveled. Part connected to Mount Pyre. It's intended that one hops down the ledges on your way back towards Slateport City after you deal with Team Aqua or Magma atop Mount Pyre. Except you just got the HM for Fly, and the situation is dire, so why wouldn't you just fast travel instead? Of course, that's not my philosophy these days, but my point remains. No one I've talked with about this route has known that it's connected to Mount Pyre. There's really no other reason to traverse this route this way, other than to not have to backtrack toward Fortree if you're playing without flying, which as far as challenge runs go, playing without fly is a little bit less weighty than something like a Nuzlocke. The playable maps are relatively tiny, just fly. But if your mind can't be changed, there are a few goodies to be had and interesting trainers to talk to. Cutting the first tree you see nets you a rare candy, which are rare. You can also battle this psychic, who appears to have discovered the secret to strength in the Pokemon world. Just decide not to lose. It's that easy, I guess. Or not. I don't think I know of an NPC who's more blunt than this guy. I feel sad. Dang, that makes me feel bad. This girl buys some more berries, gives you the Giga Drain TM in Gen 3 and a Big Root in Gen 6, if you have a Grass-type Pokemon in your party. I'd hate to come here without one, only to think I'm missing out on something, or to rerun this route in general. But if we look at an overhead map, we can see that you'll probably end up repeating this route several times if you aren't careful. This northeastern portion of the route is made into a one-way by the copious ledges. If we hop down a few more, we can meet cool trainer Clyde, who decides to test our worthiness to have badges like he's an Elite 4 member or something. Clyde and his level 29 Swellow are a force to be reckoned with. Psychic Jackie warns us about the potential of our Pokemon suddenly developing psychic powers. I've never considered it, but is it possible for non-psychic Pokemon to develop psychic powers the same way humans in the game seem to be able to? I guess that might explain Pokemon such as Chansey and Gorobus being able to learn moves like Psychic. Perhaps all beings have the potential for psychic power, and move pools could serve as a means to show the individual potential of a species. They can't just give every Pokemon psychic abilities, that would skew balancing, but narratively this may be a possibility. Overall, this section of the route feels very bizarre. The primary draws of the route can be accessed readily through Route 118. It's a liminal space by definition, as the primary function of this part of the route is to use it as a shortcut. Unlike other routes, it's not a place to hang out, train, or catch a rare Pokemon. You just pass through. I know places described as liminal online are typically devoid of people, but I think the oddball trainers you meet here contribute to the vibe. It's really odd to see the types of trainers you'd speak to on Mount Pyre in sunny grassland, regardless of how close it is. Mount Moon is an iconic location, there's no question about it, but it's one of the returning locations in the Johto games that's extremely truncated. This is understandable given that Gold, Silver, and Crystal depict the entire Kanto region in their post-game. Some things just had to get scaled down, even more so for the locations you aren't required to go through to get all of the Kanto badges. Mount Moon is one such location with a reduced interior. It goes from a sprawling cavern that attracts geology and paleontology enthusiasts of all skill levels to a quick jaunt between Pewter and Cerulean. I'm not criticizing the fact that it isn't one-to-one with its original counterpart. I'm simply acknowledging that the vibe does shift as a result of the changes. Mount Moon feels deeply wrong. There's more to do outside on the connecting routes than there is to do within the cave. For this iconic cavern, this insurmountable mountain, to take 5 seconds to get through is a foreign feeling. I recall playing Fire Red and Leaf Green for the first time and being filled with the sense that I was undertaking a test of a new trainer's endurance. You're told countless times to prepare well for the journey through Mount Moon, and it really can be an arduous journey if you're underprepared. Then, in 2010, when I played Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I stocked up on repels and potions and all manner of items, anticipating that my second journey through Mount Moon, this time as a seasoned trainer, would be challenging. And then there was nothing but a rival battle. I thought to myself, I guess they can't put something interesting in every single place. But they did put something interesting here. This event is basically the only reason I selected Johto Mount Moon for this video. You see, in Legends Arceus, there's a quest involving the moonlit activities of Wild Clefairy in the Coronet Highlands. They put on a dance in front of the full moon and leave behind a moonstone. I recall many people being surprised to know that this was actually a reference to something you can witness in the Johto games, on Monday nights only. If you take this ladder up rather than continuing on the floor, you reach Mount Moon Square, an entirely new area. If you come at the right time, again, Monday nights, you can witness a 2D version of the spectacle you may have witnessed in Arceus. They hop along this pond which reflects the moon, a brilliant way to depict it in a top-down game, and leave upon noticing you. You can collect the moonstone they leave behind and do this every Monday night. It's really cool and quite easy to miss. There aren't any exclusive Pokemon or anything here, so the novelty of watching this event does wear off after a few times. There's also a shop here, which, to my knowledge, is one of the only ones in the series that has hours. They're open from 10 AM to 5:59 PM, and sell some refreshments typical of a tourist stop. Could you imagine if Pokemarts or the department store closed? It's weird to think about, considering their analogs in the real world do close. Well, maybe not convenience stores in Japan, but malls certainly do. I guess everything being 24-hour in Pokemon games is one of those things that you don't think about while playing, like what exactly all the NPCs eat. Of all the shops that would close though, it makes sense that this one at Mount Moon Square does. I'm guessing it's a tourist or hiking attraction, and typically you don't do these things after dark. The man behind the counter is old, so he probably has better things to do than sell lemonade at 2 a.m. That's about it for this place, but I'd like to point out something on the route leading up to it. This is perhaps the most devious trainer placement in the entire series. I was completely blindsided trying to avoid this other trainer, and my brain short-circuited while I processed the sheer cheese that went into putting this NPC here. Major props, honestly. I can't even be mad. Well played. Now, I just mentioned this place in my Safari Zone video, but the Altering Cave is too odd not to mention. There's almost no conceivable reason to visit here. You can't even make the excuse of wanting to pick up all the items for completion's sake, even potions or something, because there are none to be had. All you can find here in an unaltered save game are Zubat, which is where the almost no reason to visit here comes into play. You could use this place as a speed EV grinding spot, but there are more convenient places to use. One's not exclusive to the post-game. So why does this place exist if it has no use? Well, it appeared originally in Fire Red and Leaf Green, with data existing in the games to suggest that there were supposed to be events that changed the Pokemon encountered inside. You would have been able to change the Zubat into Mareep, Aipom, Pineco, Shuckle, Teddiursa, Houndour, Stantler, or Smeargle. Nothing was done with this area in the time it took between Fire Red and Leaf Green and Emerald, and when the latter was released, still nothing was done. Not even a single remote, limited, one-off distribution. To make it even weirder, every single Pokemon that would have been available as part of this scrap distribution ended up in Emerald's extension to the Safari Zone, except Smeargle, who was put at the Battle Frontier. So, in essence, the intended outcome of the Altering Cave was added into a game alongside it. It doesn't appear until after the champion is beaten, so it makes me wonder why they left it accessible in the first place. They weren't particularly shy with limited events and exclusive items prior to this, and really the only other significant unused yet accessible event that comes to mind is the Azure Flute. I would really like to know if there exists any documentation regarding development decisions made about the Altering Cave. So if anybody knows anything, please, let me know. I would say that the earlier you got into Pokemon games, the more likely it is that you passed over places like these. The original games were sometimes frustratingly open-ended, and the small sizes of the assets meant that more care could be taken towards things that aren't on the path to the credits sequence. Pokemon games do still have extra, unnecessary areas, but the quick developmental cycle means that they're more intentional. A trip off the beaten path is usually going to reward you with a rare Pokemon nowadays. As we've seen today, that hasn't always been the case. Which of these places have you been to? Which of these have you not been to? Was there anything you expected me to mention, but I didn't? Let me know down below. Liminal spaces. If somehow you've been ignorant to the cultural zeitgeist of the past half-decade or so, let me explain. Liminal spaces are the places in between. The most literal example of a liminal space is a hallway, a space between two spaces whose entire purpose is just to be a threshold to be crossed. But in the public consciousness, they've become more metaphorical. This is a good example. The in-between represented in this photo is human habitation. This space is between being occupied, leaving it in an empty state. And for a lot of people, images like this can evoke feelings of unease, of displacement, of sonder, maybe even nostalgia. Me myself, some images can almost call up feelings of mourning. To see a place so warm in such a cold context, I just don't like it. But liminal spaces have evolved even further than that. For some, it's enough that a place just makes a person uneasy for it to be liminal. It just needs to feel wrong. Not necessarily creepy. And all of these are more or less the rough definitions of today's topic. Liminal spaces in Pokemon games. Some may meet multiple definitions, or just one. I thought we'd start off with places that fit the most literal definition of a liminal space. The gates separating towns and routes. These gates were created for behind-the-scenes reasons. They were originally intended to mask the need to load different tile sets in different areas and make the world feel more continuous. We imagine the various regions to look like they're detailed maps, but in reality they look more like this. These gate loading zones have featured heavily since the first generation, with a few exceptions. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald do away with them, instead utilizing caves and forests to break up the world, if at all. These factors really contribute to the open and breezy vibe of the Hoenn region. In the other games, though, the root gates can feel a bit surreal. Have you ever stopped and spent time in one of the gates? Maybe you've stayed to check the weather or the current swarms in Gen 5, but have you ever really lingered in a gate? That probably isn't the case. For the most part, you just walk like 10 tiles and you're in the new area. That's what they're for. Sometimes there might be an NPC with something interesting to say. Rarely, though, there's something of interest, almost as if they were little roadside attractions. The Kanto region's gates are perhaps the most bustling. Several excellent items are given to you in the various gates by Oak's aides. A few even have second floors like the ones on coastal Kanto. They've got binoculars that allow you to see some rare Pokémon and maybe even pinpoint their locations for yourself. I could fill this video just with quirky Kanto pass-throughs, but I think I'll limit myself to the most infamous. Halfway through an adventure through Kanto, you're stopped from entering Saffron City through its gates on any side. After taking for granted the ability to pass through them since the beginning of the game, you're suddenly unable to use this set of 4. You are able to progress through them after you provide the gate guards with drinks, but in the meantime, there's an alternative means of getting around central Kanto: the underground paths that allow you to bypass Saffron City. Why do these exist? They're straight underground paths going east-west and north-south. Save for a few master trainers in the Let's Go games, they are uninhabited. Sometimes you can find items, but really these tunnels only exist to keep you from Saffron City. I think what really is weird about these as a liminal space is the context they are traversed in. Think back to a time in which you went through a tunnel in a train or a car. It likely barely registered as anything more than a change of scenery to you. If you were to walk through that same tunnel though, what would that be like? For me, it's a much different feeling. That tunnel becomes a cave. You want to look over your shoulder. It isn't lit up well enough for your liking. No one knows you're down here. All these thoughts run through my head, whereas if I was separated from the tunnel by metal and glass, it would just be another day. And the Kanto Underground is one such tunnel. Walking around in it, it makes you wonder if you're even supposed to be here. It's like a maintenance tunnel or an unfinished something. I always wondered as a kid if a train or car was going to come through if I didn't go fast enough, so I booked it. Nothing ever shows up though. I was chased through by nothing. The gates in Pokemon are literal liminal spaces. They don't immediately draw up feelings of unease. Wait around a bit though, and that feeling arrives. They're glorified sidewalks, and the only thing that makes them interesting enough to talk about is that they have 4 walls and a roof, whereas a road doesn't. The final thing I'll point out about them is that they highlight better than any place one curious aspect about the world of the Pokemon games. For the most part, interiors in Pokemon games are larger than they might seem from the outside. It's a common video game trope, not exclusive to Pokemon, but it is part of its identity. Buildings are just inside these black voids. It's one of those things you cannot unsee once you notice it. Nowhere is this more prominent than in the gates. There's an infinite world just beyond the walls that are containing you at any given moment, and there's nothing in that world. The original Backrooms Liminal Space post mentions that you can go there if you no-clip out of reality. That's not a realistic fear to have at all, but I do find that idea unsettling as a stretch of the imagination. Fiction is filled with stories of people traveling to other dimensions and realities and having grand adventures. Rarely do you see one where a person just slips into nothingness and is never seen again. That's scary, and I think I know exactly where that fear started in myself. In Gen 4, you can go to the void beyond the gates. You see, the map is made up of chunks, like you may be familiar with in the case of Minecraft. Due to how the load lines work in Diamond and Pearl, if you move fast enough where 4 chunks meet, you just break reality. It sounds like a creepypasta, but it's real. And it's real easy too, to the point where it's possible some random kid has done this on accident while messing around in Jubilife. Imagine that. You're some 7-year-old going in circles on a bike, and then your game stops working correctly. The east becomes the west, and pausing puts you inside a building. From there, if you move correctly, you're in the void. It's endless, and stepping in the wrong direction can get you stuck or freeze your game. Go the right way and follow instructions, and it's actually possible to access old event Pokemon like Darkrai and Shaman. If you go far enough out, for about an hour, the game begins to load visual data again, but everything remains intangible. Sometimes it's easy to forget that video games are their own little worlds with their own rules and boundaries. They have their own operational definitions and conditions that merely simulate concepts from the real world. When a glitch like this comes along, you remember that what would be an impassable wall in our world is just a rectangle that pushes Mario outward perpendicularly in a video game. It really takes you out of the game, and you hardly even realize you were so immersed in the first place. That is part of the magic of the Pokemon games. Why don't we talk about literal liminal spaces that are on the opposite end of the spectrum? Places that are more overtly unsettling. Send-Off Spring in the Sinnoh region is unique as far as literal liminal spaces go. Unlike the route gates, Send-Off Spring is an interesting place on the way to another interesting place. It connects to Turnback Cave, the home of Giratina in the regular world. To get here, you need only follow the story in Platinum. You and Cynthia are dropped here after defeating Cyrus. It's such a weird place too in the narrative of Platinum. You're dropped off here at a flowery spring after an interdimensional battle and told to just go back to your mundane gym challenge. Other Pokemon games do contend with a little bit of tonal whiplash after the climaxes of the world-ending peril, but only in Platinum is it so nonchalant. In Diamond and Pearl, a curious trend continues from Generation 3 in which new areas open up in places you've already been to after you beat the game. Unlike cases such as Cerulean Cave or even the Pokemon League, which are explicitly blocked off, the entrance to Send-Off Spring spontaneously opens up. Something similar happens in Emerald, in which the entrance to Altering Cave just opens. Send-Off Spring is the lesser-known fourth lake of Sinnoh, where the boundaries between the regular world and the distortion world is weakest. The pool of Pokemon that can be found here reflect that, with all manner of ghost types both inside and outside Turnback Cave. It almost gives one the impression that this is a place between life and death itself. Chimecho can be found here as well, which is interesting. Chimecho appears to be based on glass wind chimes called Furin that are intended to ward against evil. It should be noted that Chimecho itself has no such lore, but is frequently placed in areas with large concentrations of ghost types and bad energy. But back on the bright side, Send-Off Spring is such a vibe. It's a flowery, foggy crater. It's lonely in a good way. It's the kind of place you would find a legendary or other rare Pokemon, so it's odd that you need to traverse further to do that. So why don't we press on? On the outset, Turnback Cave appears to be your standard run-of-the-mill Lost Woods type area. The layout is not straightforward, and you think you need to do some trial and error to make meaningful progress. This is not the case. Unlike the Lost Cave of the Sevi Islands or the Lost Woods of Zelda fame, there is no correct way to delve further into Turnback Cave. To reach the end, you need to pass by 3 central pillars. Each time you take any door, there is a 25% chance that you will enter a room with said pillar. 75% of the time, you enter a vast, foggy room with rocks strewn about. If you do not reach the end by 30 rooms, or you save and reload in an attempt to backtrack, you're put back at the beginning. What awaits at the end differs by version and playstyle. In Diamond and Pearl, Giratina slumbers at the end. In Platinum, this is also the case if you defeated or ran away from Giratina at your encounter in the Distortion World. Also, in Platinum only, there's a tear in the fabric keeping the Distortion World at bay, and entering it is how you get the Grishus Orb. So yes, for all that I said Send-Off Spring was an interesting literal liminal space, so is Turnback Cave. It can be argued that in Platinum it only exists to get you to the Distortion World, and that's where this chain ends. The Distortion World is unsettling and weird and all these other things, but I wouldn't consider it a liminal space. It's quite terminal. It's not a world between worlds, it's a world of its own. Just like the Void though, I would hate to be stuck here. I think we'll end this literal definition of liminal section by dropping by the Kalos region. I don't talk enough about the 3D games, I think. But where are we going? Route 1. You only use it to get between Vaniville and Aquacorde towns. That's it. It is odd. It's the first route that doesn't have any Pokemon to encounter. In fact, it's the only one since. It's even more odd to see it at night because most of us probably started the game during the daytime. More on that later. As if it wasn't obvious enough by the opening cutscene, this route also flaunts the fact that this was the first 3D mainline game in your face. It's full of camera angles that show off the fact that you're no longer in a little top-down box. Well, you sort of still are, but XY take every opportunity to show the sky to the player. Before Gen 6, you'd have to go someplace special to see the sky, like a reflective pond or Sky Arrow Bridge, which by the way, Kalos Route 1's theme is a remix of that track. I wonder if that was because both get funky with camera angles. Since then, the sky is something we take for granted. Really, I think the number one way to get these unsettling liminal feelings from these literal liminal spaces is to just stay in them. They're not meant to be examined any longer than it takes to speed through them. It's like looking at any word longer than it takes to read it. You start second guessing yourself. It's just weird. You know what I mean? I think X and Y, while complete games, kind of invite feelings that the game is unfinished. or at least that there's more to uncover. It came out in a strange era of gaming where people were just beginning to let go of playground rumors, but there were still strange things in games that invited discussion. For every Bigfoot and GTA rumor, you had actual skybox ghost things in Super Mario Galaxy 2. Kalos Route 1 feels like the sort of place that would have one of those rumors. Especially with the funky camera angles, someone could have plausibly concocted a rumor that if you moved around just right, you'd see something like an unreleased Pokémon out beyond that fence. But there's nothing here. Like, at all. And that's what makes it so effective as a liminal space. It's so uninteresting that it makes us do the work to make it interesting. The next time you're in a hallway or taking an empty road, really examine it. See if you can't find some profundity in the mundane. The next class of liminal spaces we'll talk about are the ones in between states of habitation. I made a video about abandoned areas in the Pokemon games, and so I won't be talking about any of the ones featured in that video. Not only did I already cover them, most of them don't exactly fit this second definition. They're abandoned, forgotten, and likely never going to be inhabited by people. I'm interested in this section in the ones that are uninhabited when they ought to otherwise be. The perfect example of this is Black City as featured in Pokemon Black. You see, Black City and White Forest have a special population mechanic determined by the time it takes to reach them from starting your save file. You must reach them within 4 days and come back every day to maintain the goodies within. If you take several weeks and or don't regularly visit, the population shrinks, and then it looks like this. It feels like a glitch, like all the people haven't loaded, but they're not meant to be here unless you play your game in a specific way. You can retroactively boost the population using connection with other games, but as you can imagine, that's really hard to do in the modern era. Black City in 2026 is a mostly useless, leftover feature that was almost always intended to be obsolete. People have complained endlessly about planned obsolescence in Pokemon games, and I don't really intend to get up on that soapbox myself. The one thing I will say though is that Black City is part of a group of mysterious lost media areas in Pokemon that were always intended to be temporary. If you don't speedrun your game or have Black City ball knowledge, you come upon a very lonely city. There's one more reason I wanted to talk about this city. The empty version of Black City reminds me of Gary's mod, which is like the liminal space game. A big flat space surrounded by skyscrapers in every direction is just GM Big City. There's a project going on right now called NoClip, and so far they've made explorable 3D versions of Platinum and Heart Gold Soul Silver. When they do Black, I'd love to just look around Black City. TLDR, a place that should be bustling but is empty is scary. Images of places like these really speak for themselves. Next, I want to talk about a topic that's kind of out there. I mostly talk about the video game series on this channel, but sometimes I diverge from that path, and this is one of those times. The next stop on our devoid of people liminal spaces journey is actually in the trading card game. You see, sometimes the trading card game makes up settings and locations that serve as the theme of a set or an era. For example, during the Break era of XY, there was a mini narrative playing out in the card art regarding a twin set of worlds, a more natural one and a more technological one. Pokemon Break are said to originate from these alternate worlds. There's a whole lot of stuff to be said about these TCG exclusive locations, but I'll only keep it to just one today. Holon and its surrounding area is the setting for the latter third of the Generation 3 TCG sets. It's a research facility in an untamed region of the world that serves as the origin point for Delta species Pokemon. If you don't know, these are Pokemon that through exposure to special electromagnetic waves have gained the properties of different types. For example, Delta Aerodactyl is a fire type rather than a rock, or fighting because this is the TCG. You may notice though that these Pokemon still retain the weaknesses they would have if they were regular Pokemon. That's what sets these Pokemon apart from terastallized Pokemon, which you may have been thinking of while I was explaining this phenomenon. Actually, when Scarlet and Violet were doing their pre-release reveals, there were a lot of people claiming that the terastallization gimmick was just ripping off Delta species, but it is distinct. But I digest. Holon and its surrounding areas have multiple 3D renders that are just oh so 2005, and I invite you to look at a few. This one is the most striking to me. This is the Holon Research Tower, which is the origin of the electromagnetic pulse. The arcing lightning of the tower appears to be the only source of light in the image. The sky is foggy, cloudy, and gray, which is not too uncommon in other Holon-associated images. I don't think it's nighttime, but I'm not sure. It's very dreamlike. Despite all the advanced technology and research we're told about, there's nobody around. That's probably because they use 3D renders and the people would look uncanny, like on this Holon transceiver card, except sometimes they did put people on them. On some cards, these renders are featured in the background, and on at least one, they're illustrated. Actually, if you look at some of the renders in Stadium cards, you see them in the background of a lot of other cards. Here are a few more of note. I just love these sets and the card arts. They portray such a wild, untamed, lonely, liminal story. It's a consistent and interconnected world. It would never happen, but I would love to take a trip to Holon in a game. For now, I'm just stuck at looking at old artwork and feeling not quite nostalgia. And now for the one that just feels weird. Pokémon Moon and Pokémon Ultra Moon. The in-game time in them is flip-flopped, so playing them during the daytime makes it nighttime. Most people have their waking hours during the daytime, and most of their time playing Pokémon is probably during those hours as well. Nighttime play for most of us was something we do rarely or secretly as children. Of course, there are exceptions, but I don't think it's a stretch to say daytime is the default. So let me set the stage. It's 2016, and you start Pokémon Moon, and it's nighttime. You're breaking convention from the moment you booted it up. And the longer you play, the more it gets weird that everyone, including children, are up all night. And then you realize that everyone in practically every Pokemon game is awake 24/7. You just didn't notice because you sleep. Having a journey in the glow of the moon is typically not how journeys go. It's just safer in the light of day. Nighttime is scary from an evolutionary perspective. Our vision as humans is drastically reduced at nighttime, and the world can be very dark. We take for granted the ability to go out at night, to experience nightlife in today's age. Before the age of outdoor lighting such as gas lamps and light bulbs, going out at night could be a death sentence. Even today, most people stay indoors or at home at night. If the place you live has no nightlife and conditions allow, I encourage you to go out and make note of how empty the industrial world seems at night. What do you experience that you wouldn't be able to if the sun was out? A while back, I had to take someone to the train station around midnight. I remember being filled with a lonely feeling. There was no one around and hardly any parked cars. It felt like at any moment the world could just fall away and I'd just be left in the stars, much like Hyperspace Lumiose. It was weird, but it probably would have been weirder in a different way with more people. I would have been wondering what everyone was doing in the city streets that ought to have been empty. It's like an inverse of Black City. Part of that feeling, I think, is due to how there aren't a whole lot of things to do outside of your house at all hours of the night anymore within a city or town, at least in the United States. Even bars where I live tend to close while the night is young. Hardly anything is 24-hour like it is in the Pokemon games. I remember a time when Walmart was 24-hour, and from a young age my father would take me at midnight to get whatever new releases were coming out, regardless of the fact that it was too late at night for me to actually enjoy them. Walmart in the middle of the night went the way of the dodo around the time of 2020. Sometimes the world itself feels liminal, like you just pass through it to get to work or school or the store. This feeling is more apparent at night, when there are less possible things to do. These experiences and more contribute to how wrong the world of Pokémon Moon feels. I'm not used to a 24-hour nightlife anymore. I live in a place where people go home and go to bed at night. The Pokémon world is not that kind of place, and Pokémon Moon is just in your face about it. I've been the Sludge King, and those are just a few of the liminal spaces in Pokémon games. Ruins. The remains of civilization. The lives we humans live are far less permanent than we would like them to be. Even the things we do and create don't last that long, all things considered. Some of the oldest ruins in the world are around 12,000 years old. They're almost certainly not the first, but think about that. This planet is billions of years old. Our species is a flash in the pan comparatively. It really puts things into perspective. It makes me want to use my life wisely. So here I am making a video on YouTube about Pokemon ruins, because where there are people, there are marks on our environment. The Pokemon world has ruins and ancient civilizations just like our world, so I thought it would be fun to examine some of the ancient ruins in Pokemon games and piece together what we can about how people in the ancient Pokemon world lived. I think I'd like to start off talking about the unknown ruins. There are 3 regions in the Pokemon world in which unknown are found in ruins, all 3 of them quite geographically close: Kanto, Johto, and Sinnoh. I'll talk about them individually here shortly, but I want to establish the links between them first. I think the ruins of Alph and the Tenobi and Salacion ruins were constructed for and served similar purposes, but I would only go as far to say that the ruins of Alph and Tenobi ruins were built by the same people. Not only are they in relatively close proximity, being from bordering regions, they also have puzzles that unlock access to the unknown. The Salacion ruins have no such mechanism, even in the ancient past of Hisui. I propose then that two groups independently came to revere unknown, a people in the Kanto-Johto area, and one of the groups inhabiting ancient Hisui. This is supported by the existence of the Sinjo ruins, built by two groups from Johto and Sinnoh who blended their culture to worship Arceus. They hit you over the head with this idea as soon as you arrive, with this hiker drawing comparisons between Alph and the Spear Pillar specifically. Now that we have all that established, I want to cover Tenobi first because it's the largest geographically and probably the one the least of you have visited. The Tenobi ruins are situated on Seven Island of the Sevi Islands, which is an archipelago south of the Kanto mainland, which, by the way, the Sevi Islands are considered part of the Kanto region. They consist of two parts: the Tenobi Chambers at the southern part of the island, and the Tenobi Key in Savalt Canyon that unlocks the chambers. Prior to completing the puzzle in the Tenobi Key, unknown don't appear, and their existence is largely unconfirmed. After you do, unknown begin to appear in the seven chambers in sets of a few at a time. The name Tenobi is an anagram of botany, and the chambers are named after flowers that closely match the colors of each chamber. A similar pun plays out in the original Japanese. There is a quirk with how unknown are generated here, where some forms are more likely to be shiny than others. The value that determines unknown shininess also determines what letter it is if left to chance, but because the encounter rates are fixed by the letter, some are more or less likely to be shiny, ranging from 1 in 5,120 to 1 in 18,432. I have experience with this. I went 48,000 encounters for one of the rare ones and came away with the 1 in 5,000 one.
Shiny unknown. Oh no!
Know what you're getting into if you hunt here. Even then, probably don't. This does not apply to unknown in generations after 3. Outside, we can encounter several trainers who give us a little bit of information about the ruins and how they're seen by modern people. This pair appears to be an apprentice painter and either her minder or teacher. They came here to paint an ancient building, and interestingly, Edna has a Smeargle. That might not seem like a big deal, but every Smeargle is personalized. Hers has Fake Out, Extreme Speed, Protect, and Quick Attack. Not what I would have done, but she's obviously not trying to complete a Pokédex. The people of the Pokemon world are aware of the existence of multiple unknown ruins, as evidenced by this NPC. Whether they've been connected by the Pokemon themselves or some sort of architectural quirk is unknown to me. There's also a ruin maniac here who dates the Tenobi ruins as being at least 1500 years old. That's about all I have to say about this place. Its mystery is really heightened by the other places, only when viewed as a set. The ruins of Alph are synonymous with unknown. When I asked 5 of my friends about unknown ruins, all of them immediately assumed that I was talking about Alph. I can't fault them, because the other two areas, Tenobi and Salacion, are pretty bare bones by comparison. The ruins of Alph stand out because for all the mystery, there are things to uncover. Chief among them, the unknown themselves. The researchers here have devised the Unknown Report, and catching new forms of unknown works towards completing it. In Generation 2, it's a Pokédex mode consisting of a list of words associated with the various forms, like Nuzzle for N and Laugh for L. In the remakes, it's a key item that adds some flavor to the scientific side of the Pokemon world. As you catch more and more, their understanding grows and it updates. Let's talk about a few of the advancements. There are conflicting ideas about how the unknown communicate. What is known, though, is that their communication, telepathic or otherwise, can be picked up on a radio. Regardless of if unknown are the origin of written language, which I don't believe in personally, I think they do intend to impart knowledge. Because unknown communicate with each other wordlessly, I think the unknown script was devised so that humans and unknown could pass knowledge amongst each other. In real life, bridge languages have historically existed as secondary languages people can learn in order to communicate with a wider variety of people with differing mother tongues. English is one such lingua franca, and I'm using it to communicate to you now. Other names you might have heard include bridge, trade, or common languages, though more specifically, I think the unknown script would be a pidgin language, which is an impromptu, artificial means of communication created for the express purpose of allowing two groups or more with differing languages to exchange ideas. It's no one's first language or script, and it's born out of necessity. A real-world example of this would be Hand Talk, or the North American Plains Sign Language. If you like to do research rabbit holes, that's an interesting one to hop down on a rainy day. If you're a greasy Reddit or neckbeard with more interest in Funko Pops and gamer subs than history, though, you might recognize the scene from The Mandalorian historian where he communicates with the Tuscans using his hands. So, what can we read in what I assume is the lingua franca of the unknown? The ones in Heart Gold Soul Silver read as follows. Our clan engraved words in this place. Our clan created Pokémon statue outside. They possess power to sense with mind and reject outside. We humans need to walk with them. We leave here for the sake of them. Our friends look up and heartily congratulate us. Now I specified Heart Gold Soul Silver because in Crystal, the messages are more grammatically accurate. They're way more stilted in the remakes. I choose to interpret this change as Game Freak leaning into the lingua franca aspect. It's dumbed down because it's not a language intended for scholarly purposes. It gets the point across, and that's all. Now, if any English speakers were curious, in the original Japanese games, the Unknown don't spell out English words for the most part. They spell out messages in simplified Romaji, which is the phonetic English spelling of Japanese words. It's how the Japanese type, for example. And I guess how the Unknown do too. You access these messages by reading clues on the back of the puzzle chamber doors. One is accessible from the offset and requires use of an escape rope to unlock. Another requires you to surf and you must use flash to unlock it. The latter two are accessed via the northernmost parts of Mount Mortar and require Ho-Oh in your party and a water stone to be used. The Unknown, by the way, begin to appear in the wild in sets after the 4 puzzle chambers are solved. They baffle me. Not the mechanisms themselves, puzzles are fun, but the Pokemon they depict. One depicts Ho-Oh, not a problem. 2 of them though have been extinct for millions of years, and as I touched upon in my video on Pokemon museums, one of them is only alive in very small populations. Their fossils can be found here in Generation 4, but judging from real world experience, accurate fossil reconstruction is a very active process. For example, it's taken us almost 150 years as a species to take our understanding of Megalosaurus from this to this. For millennia prior to that, potential explanations of fossils ranged from dragon bones to giant bones to elephant bones. Really, for the vast majority of recorded history, fossils were just weird bones. All that to say, it's very unlikely that humans as we know them lived alongside or even understood these ancient fossil Pokemon. Now I know that the Pokemon world is not our world one-to-one, and there are examples of very technologically advanced ancient civilizations, but I doubt the ruins of Alph are dozens of millions of years old. They're probably about as old as the Tenobi ruins, which are a couple thousand years old at least. If they dated back millions of years, I'm certain we would have heard about it. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning, not too much the humans build lasts longer than 10,000 years. Not only this, writing we can see in the ruins refers to the writers, the people of Alph, as humans. At this point, I should probably mention that the Unknown report refers to the inhabitants as, quote, relatives of humans, end quote. And then it refers to the people as humans again. That's a piece of the puzzle that I don't get. But I think with knowledge that comes later, the scientist who wrote the report may have just chosen an awkward way of referring to human ancestors of humans. The introduction of Mega Aerodactyl and its later Pokedex entry in Ultra Moon somewhat muddies this conundrum further. The relevant ones read as follows. From Ultra Moon, Mega Evolution awakened some dormant genes, bringing back the sharp rocks that once covered Aerodactyl's entire body. From Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. The power of Mega Evolution has completely restored its genes. The rocks on its body are harder than diamond. Aerodactyl in the ancient world looked nothing like their depiction on the slide puzzle. But if you don't believe me yet, listen to the most relevant one, from the Crown Tundra where Aerodactyl and other fossils appear in the wild. This is a ferocious Pokemon from ancient times. Apparently even modern technology is incapable of producing a perfectly restored specimen. I strongly believe that this Pokemon's appearance strongly suggests that none of the fossils in the Crown Tundra are native. They all went extinct. The modern ones are all from some sort of reconstituted Jurassic Park-esque anti-extinction effort, except Kabuto. As I mentioned earlier, this little dude has stood the test of time on its own. To reiterate, there was no way that the people of the ruins of Alph could have known about what they depicted on the slide puzzles. So if they didn't coexist, and even if they did, the Pokemon wouldn't have looked like that, how and why did the people here come up with these depictions for their slide puzzles? Unknown writing we can read on the floor from the humans that inhabited here implies that they left for the sake of the unknown. They departed to learn to walk with Pokemon as friends, and so left behind measures to protect the unknown. The fact that they put puzzles in both Tenobi and Alph implies to me that this separation of people and unknown was never intended to be permanent. The caveat there is, I don't think they ever intended to return themselves. I put forward that the humans of Alph were shown Pokemon from their future in order to seal away the unknown. Only when their descendants were able to recognize what the slide puzzles depicted could they be opened and the knowledge of unknown allowed to spread. In reality, I don't imagine any of this was intended, but it really makes a compelling in-game idea, doesn't it? So, where did the people of Alph go? If you bring a fateful encounter or Hall of Origin Arceus to the ruins of Alph, you can be transported to the Sinjoh Ruins, a mysterious place between Johto and Sinnoh. All we know about its relative location is that it's northeast of Blackthorn City, which probably means it's south of Sinnoh. That lines up vaguely with the real-life inspirations of the two regions, with Sinnoh's island of Hokkaido to the northeast of Johto's Kansai region. We get to see very little of it, but what we do see is reminiscent of both the ruins of Alph and the Spear Pillar, as mentioned earlier. This whole area is one of the most significant pieces of evidence tying Unknown to Arceus. The ruins were constructed to worship Arceus by people who came from the Johto area and Sinnoh, two places where there are unknown ruins. The only places where unknown ruins exist if you consider Tenobi and Alph to be of similar origin like I do. What is there to do at the snow-covered Sinjoh ruins? Other than looking around at the wall-to-wall snow, we can catch Cynthia at the cabin, who's here on an archaeological mission to study myths and ruins. Kind of like us right now. The hiker who greets you at the offset really hammers home the idea that Alph and the Spear Pillar are related. You know, if you haven't picked up on me saying that 3 times already. He seems to be really wise and knowledgeable for a nameless NPC. He compares Arceus' creation myth of emerging from an egg to the egg culture of Johto before informing us of a precedent of shared culture across the Pokemon world. I'm guessing you know about the big ticket event here at the ruins, so let's get on with that. If you go to the mystery stage with only Arceus in your party, you choose and bear witness to the creation of a Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina. After a dramatic cutscene featuring Arceus, Unknown, and images from a stock image library, you receive a level 1 specimen of the one you chose. You can do this twice on one save file, one time with an Arceus caught at the Hall of Origin, and one with the fateful encounter Arceus. And that's about all there is to do here. Sinjoh has been mentioned since Heart Gold and Soul Silver, believe it or not, but I'll save that for a bit later in the video. After receiving the Pokemon, we're transported back to Alph in the Johto region. We've talked at length about the Alph-Tenobi civilization and their relationship with the unknown. So, who are the mysterious people that came from Sinnoh? I believe they were related to the Celestica people of ancient Hisui due to their shared reverence of Arceus. If you didn't know, by the time of Legends Arceus, the Diamond and Pearl clans are relatively recent transplants to Hisui. Prior to their emigration from across the sea, the land of Hisui was occupied by a now lost civilization known as the Celestica, or ancient Sinnoh people. Whether or not the Diamond and Pearl clans are descendants or the successors of the Celestica is unclear to me. Although according to Ancient Verse 5, which we can unearth with the help of an Ursaluna, the Diamond and Pearl clans falsely took the name Celestica prior to their split. Whether or not they were pretenders or unworthy descendants is once again unclear. My point here is that I believe the original Celestica people moved to the Sinjoh ruins prior to their disappearance. Maybe that was their disappearance. Eventually, at least one, but maybe more, returned to Hisui from Sinjoh. The author of the old verses has at least been to Sinjoh. I don't believe it was the Diamond or Pearl clans in any shape or form, because from the offset they differed in their depiction of the almighty Sinnoh. The Diamond and Pearl clans famously disagreed on whether it was Dialga or Palkia. We, of course, know the true identity of the almighty Sinnoh to be Arceus. Legends Arceus also takes place too late for it to be the modern people of Hisui who built Sinjoh. As I said, the ancient verses in that game name Sinjoh. Kagita also mentions that the Celestica are millennia old. It makes sense when talking about Arceus worshipping people from the ancient past of the Sinnoh region to land on the Celestica people. They're the ones who built the Temple of Sinnoh, now the Spear Pillar for Arceus' sake. I think it would be best to round off our discussion of Unknown at the Solaceon ruins, which, to my estimation, was created by the Celestica people as well. In fact, going forward as a blanket statement, I believe that unless otherwise stated, the ruins we can find in Sinnoh are by and large the remnants of the Celestica civilization. The Solaceon ruins, as mentioned previously, are the least complicated of the Unknown ruins. They are a bit difficult to navigate quickly, but they lack the puzzles and locking mechanisms of the Alph-Tenobi ruins. They're open from the outset, and the Unknown themselves form a puzzle. You see, the Unknown writing on the back wall of the first room spells out the directions you're intended to use to get to the treasure room. The Unknown themselves also serve as a hint, with Unknown that spell out the word friend, appearing one letter at a time in each of the transitory rooms until you reach the end. The 20 remaining letters appear in each of the dead-end rooms with an even share. When you reach the end, you come to a room with several treasures, among them the Defog HM in Platinum, and some writing on the wall. The major inscription reads, "Friendship. All lives touch other lives to create something anew and alive." The same inscription is in Legends Arceus, and in that game, it's a single room. The structure itself is definitely more interesting in the Sinnoh games, but I think the Hisui depiction of the Solaceon ruins have more of a fun side quest. The Unknown research notes are a series of riddles that take you all over the region looking for hidden Unknown. When you find them all, Unknown begin appearing in the ruins in droves. I don't consider this to be a locking mechanism because the unknown are physically present before they begin appearing in the wild. In the case of Alf and Tenobi, not a single one can be seen anywhere before doing the puzzles. The Salacion ruins are also tied to the Ruin Maniac tunnel. This NPC advises you to check in with him after catching different types of unknown. The more unknown you see, the longer the tunnel gets until eventually a chamber containing question mark and exclamation point unknown is uncovered. It was recently discovered that you don't actually need to catch the various forms of unknown to progress the Ruin Maniac tunnel. You just need to see them. And guess what? You don't even need to see all the letters, just 26 of the 28 available forms. This means you can see the 2 unknown contained within the chamber to have it count towards unlocking the chamber itself. That's kind of funny. You also find Hippopotas in the tunnel if you never knew where it was growing up, like I didn't. While we're in the area, we might as well talk about the other ruins. Just south of Salacion in the Lost Tower is the Hollowed Tower, the historic place where Spiritomb was sealed away. Believe it or not, for all I talked about Celestica earlier, I'm not sure it's related at all. Multiple Pokédex entry throw out a figure of 500 years for Spiritomb being sealed away. So even if it was built by the Celestica, it's been used by people later than that, like us, the player. The tower could be older, but I don't know. Worth mentioning is that in Legends Arceus, the Shrouded Ruins Spiritomb Odd Keystone area is sort of northeast of Salacion ruins, whereas the Hallowed Tower is dead south. The dead obvious spot associated with the Celestica people is Celestic Town. This isn't just an English thing either. Celestica is Kaminagi, and Celestic is Kanagi in Japanese. Kanagi is derived from the words kami and nagi from my limited understanding of the Japanese language. Celestic Town itself is very traditional, and its population is among the smallest in the region. There's an herbal medicine shop here, and Cynthia's grandmother tells us that the town was founded by old-school Sinnoh worshippers. Their artifacts can be found every so often, like the old charm made from Pokémon bones. Little fun fact, this is the only town in Sinnoh where there are no televisions. I checked. Of extra interest here are the ruins. Outside the cave are frescoes of Dialga and Palkia. Inside is a fresco of Yuxi, Mesprit, and Azelf surrounding light thought to be either Dialga or Palkia. In the post-game of Platinum, Cynthia explains this point of view to us, and then offers her own. The 3 depictions could represent Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina instead of the lake spirits. The light then would represent some unknown force. Probably Arceus. I don't know though. They look pretty identical to the lake spirits, but who knows? Maybe like the almighty Sinnoh was blurred from Arceus into Dialga and Palkia, something similar happened with the Sinnoh trios. Here, as part of the story, we can prevent the ruins from being exploded by Team Galactic. Destroying such a historic spot would have been absolutely despicable, but they back off after being defeated. It's a sleepy old town otherwise. The Spear Pillar is the pinnacle of the Celestica civilization. Atop Mount Coronet, the ominous structure spears the sky with its pillars, lording over the Sinnoh region. It's the site of several major confrontations with the legends of Sinnoh, chief among them Arceus at the Hall of Origin. It has lasted for centuries after the departure of the Celestica, but it wasn't until recently that it became known by its modern name, the Spear Pillar. Once upon a time, it was known as the Temple of Sinnoh, a grand Parthenon dedicated to Arceus and the 10 Pokémon of Hisuian legend. During the climax of Pokémon Legends Arceus, Dialga or Palkia, depending on which you chose, destroys the temple upon transforming into its origin form. The roof and statues are entirely gone after this, and the pillars are reduced to the state we can see in the modern Sinnoh games. It was really cool to see this happen in-game, and it's an odd feeling to return in the Sinnoh games knowing that you, in another life or continuity or whatever you may call it, witnessed the reason they call this place what they do in real time. The appearance of the Spear Pillar differs by game actually. In Diamond and Pearl they're mirror versions, while Platinum incorporates aspects of both. Go figure. Every time we've seen this place, it gets damaged somehow, and I would not doubt that further returns to Sinnoh will trash the place irreparably. There is an extension to the Spear Pillar that can be accessed by playing the Azure Flute. When played, a spectral staircase appears leading to Arceus. A battle ensues in the sky in which you can catch a piece of the creator. In Legends Arceus, walking up the staircase leads you to a strange place that quite resembles the Mystery Stage. It's here, I think, that Arceus created Sinnoh, and probably the universe. That would make this place among the oldest in the entire series. Not the structures though, those came a bit later. Why don't we talk a little bit about the Celestica themselves? Who were they? Can we meet any of them? If I may, I'd like to take your attention to the old verses of Legends Arceus that I mentioned earlier. I assume that the ancient verses of Legends Arceus were authored by the same person. A person I believe to be cursed with immortality until they're able to impart wisdom on the successor of the ancient hero of Hisuian legend. That's us, so we likely meet them. I will spend an eternity until the one with the mission appears. Verse 12. Verses 2 and 9 in their entirety can be read as lamentations by someone who's growing weary of having to bury their friends. O you who at the world's far off end dwell, I know your wish, it is my wish as well. My own beloved is now gone from me, departed to a place I cannot reach. My old companions have left me behind, their faces faded into days gone by. Still to my breast I clutch this hopeless dream, a futile wish for us to once more meet. O you, who at the world's far off end dwell, I know your wish, it is my wish as well. But ours are cold and endless winter days, warmed only by memories locked away. Verse 2. I set the bones of Pokémon adrift upon the river. I let my memories flow on, adrift upon the river. And to the ocean they will flow, perhaps around the world they go. How many bones and days now gone have I now set adrift from me? How many bones and days to come will I yet set adrift to sea, while every gift with which I part takes a sliver of my heart? Verse 9. Verse 17 to me seals the identity of the person. Once there was a god of field, and once there was a god of spring. Upon Hisui's winds it wheeled, brought life to every growing thing. Where go you when you are not here? Asked I one day the god of spring. No answer would it give me clear, but still did I have an inkling. There is no great dark truth untold, it simply does not like the cold. This specific piece of wisdom is imparted upon us by Kagita of the Ancient Retreat, which is pretty close to where modern Celestic Town is. She informs us that Enamorus, the god of spring, doesn't stick around in Hisui in the winter. She later attempts to quote verse 17 and is unsure of herself. The verses, by the way, are buried underground for who knows how long. She's also similarly unsure about how long ago exactly the Celestica disappeared, despite all she knows, which by the way is a lot. She sets you on the quest with pretty detailed instructions on how to go about quelling the space-time distortions. It's almost as if she's forgetful just because of how much she knows. I think she's the author of the verses and an immortal. She looks quite young, yet speaks like someone centuries old. The series does have a precedent of longevic human characters by this point, but we'll talk about him later. I think she would be able to shed a lot of light on the questions that the Celestica have left behind, such as what happened to them. Game Freak really knows how to keep their cards close to their chest when it comes to elaborating on lore though, and they know when to keep their mouths shut in favor of creating speculation. The last of the Celestica ruins is going to serve as a pivoting point for the next section of this video. Viewers who are keen on their lore are probably wondering why I haven't mentioned Snowpoint Temple. This is me doing that now. Snowpoint Temple opens up a can of worms with a whole lot of implications for the past of the Pokemon world. Snowpoint Temple is, in modern Sinnoh, the most intact of all the ruins I believe belong to the Celestica. Nothing in-game to my knowledge outright says they're connected, but sophisticated masonry involving pillars in the Sinnoh region is kind of the Celestica people's architectural calling card. It's all very Greco-Roman. Volo, who claims to be an inheritor of the Celestica people, even wears a chiton and sandals, if not really to send home the vibe. At the bottom of Snowpoint Temple, there's a locked door which only responds to the presence of the stone, iron, and icicle plates. Inside is the dormant legendary Pokemon Regigigas, who legends say towed the continents on its back in order to shape the world. Generations later, after the land of Hisui became known as Sinnoh, there is no door, but Regigigas has returned to sleep. Awakening it requires the presence of Regirock, Registeel, and Regice. It is said that these Pokemon were sculpted by Regigigas out of natural materials. In Pokemon Platinum, bringing a fateful encounter Regigigas, not the one you catch in Snowpoint, to the ruins you can find on Route 228, Mount Coronet, and Iron Island, awakens Regirock, Regice, and Registeel respectively. The question I then present to you is this: why are their presences left out of the prophecies and old verses of ancient Hisui? And why are similar ruins found in at least 3 other regions? To answer that question, I think we need to go to the Hoenn region, where we were first introduced to this set of iconic legendary Pokemon. The most famous set of ruins in the Hoenn region are definitely the ones relating to the legendary giants, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Regis are the most mysterious of all the true playground rumors. The method to obtain the Regis is not as mythologized as, say, Mew under the truck, but it is based in reality, whereas the Mew rumor is just that. A rumor. I will say though, using strength on a truck is a lot less complicated than using a guide to translate text for a script intended to be read with your fingers. So how exactly does one uncover the mystery of the sleeping giants of Hoenn? If you're following along for some reason, I urge you to watch the entire process and then come back to follow it step by step. First, you need to go to the sealed chamber, which can be accessed by Route 134's underwater section. The first chamber contains the Braille alphabet, which you're intended to use to decipher this inscription. It says dig here, and if you use dig in front of it, a doorway to another chamber opens. Inside, there are 7 inscriptions. Oddly, the English version of the message is changed from Gen 3 to 6, despite it remaining the same in the original Japanese. Regardless of version, the meaning of the inscriptions don't change. According to them, the writers lived in these caves thanks to the legendary giants. For one reason or another, though, the writers came to fear them, and so sealed them away in hopes that someone more courageous would come along in the future. It's unclear if the people lived alongside the Regis or simply harnessed their power. I think the latter is more likely given that Regirock, Regice, and Registeel were locked away. The final inscription reads, "First comes Relicanth, last comes Wailord" in Ruby, Sapphire, and their remakes. The Pokemon are switched in Emerald. Consequently, interacting with this wall with a Relicanth or Wailord in your first and last slots, depending on the version you're playing, causes an earthquake which unlocks 3 chambers scattered about the Hoenn region. The sound that plays is actually the sound of the truck from the beginning of the game coming to a stop, funnily enough. I like to imagine that the moving truck is driving around Hoenn unpacking the Regis as this cutscene plays. In true Regi fashion, they each have their own cryptic method of unlocking them once you find them, which is sort of a Regi staple, and they are everywhere. You can find similar chambers in the Sinnoh region, as mentioned earlier, and the Unova and Galar regions. I think that the presence of sealed away legendary giants and their lack of presence in prophecy and folklore can be best explained by Regigigas not being some profound god or force of nature, like other legendary Pokemon. According to common legend, Regigigas is responsible for the positioning of the continents themselves. I don't think this is the case in reality, but like Professor Laventon, I think there is a bit of truth to the legend. I think it's more likely that Regigigas as a species are highly creative Pokemon. Likely, a set of them was created by Arceus in order to perform small-scale changes to the natural world. Living in an era where all-powerful Pokemon actually did exist and scared the crap out of people could have contributed to a hyperbolic reputation for Regigigas. We just don't see it perform any of the feats it's purported to be able to pull off. Most of what Regigigas does is sleep. On the flip side, we can witness legendaries like Palkia warp space-time or Kyogre drown the world. I personally think that Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Regieleki, and Regidrago were created by Regigigas because it grew bored with simply moving around dirt and rocks. It desired more, and perhaps to create friends for itself. This being part of Regigigas' nature explains the presence of multiple sets of the legendary giants coexisting, including Regigigas itself. Being the only continent-towing giant for miles in any direction must be a lonely existence, especially in the era before people and Pokemon grew to coexist peacefully. Regigigas is a rather sad Pokemon when viewed through that lens, and I think collecting my thoughts has made me appreciate it more. It's not just weird slacking. It's just a sleepy, lonely little giant guy. Worth mentioning though is that a single Pokedex entry from S.H.I.E.L.D. suggests that Regigigas created the other legendary giants before moving the continents, but multiple of their Pokedex entries date them to only be a couple tens of thousands of years old. I'm open to the idea of it moving continents, but I don't think it actually did. So what could have happened to make people all over the world seal them away? I think the legendary giants likely wanted to get in on their creator's business and move the land. Being comparatively cheaper copies of the original Gigas itself, I think they probably were a bit clumsy. In trying to help people like they did in the sealed chamber, they performed some great feats with unintended consequences. Just being near Regice could freeze you completely solid, for example. Either that, or they're controlled by Regigigas, and its tendency to laze around for centuries doesn't align with their sleep schedules. In that case, they may have rampaged in the absence of their creator. In at least the case of the cave-dwelling Hoennians, I think they probably sealed away the legendary giants for everyone's protection, including the Regis themselves. That's why they call upon someone more courageous. The Regis lie in wait for someone skilled enough as a trainer to tame their awesome power, or for Regigigas to wake up and stop being a lazybones. Maybe in other regions they were eradicated rather than sealed, or perhaps there are regions out there that were reduced to dust by the legendary giants of their time. It could be that the regions with Regi ruins are merely the cultures that survived them. Unfortunately, there isn't a way to know. I do really believe that the ruins weren't created by the same culture though, because there is some variance in the architecture and attitudes left behind by their creators. Some ruins require the following of instructions, and others require a 2009 visit to Toys R Us. There is one thing that I should mention though. The braille that we use in Hoenn to decode the instructions for unsealing the Regis appears in one other place, the Sevi Islands. There's a similarly cryptic puzzle in Mount Ember requiring out-of-place HM usage, and you're there to get the ruby. So I think some Hoenn Regi sealers made their way to Kanto at some point. Mount Ember is a cave, which the people inhabiting the sealed chamber seem to thrive in. I don't know what happened to them, and realistically their inclusion is just to facilitate Hoenn references to justify the side quest to unlock inter-region trading. There are actually other examples of Hoennian migration to the area, and I'll get to it here in a bit. For now, let's return to Johto. The Johto region is, for the most part, unique in that its ruins were not left behind by dead civilizations who disappeared or died out. Instead, with few exceptions that were already mentioned, the ruins of Johto were presumably created by the direct ancestors of its modern-day inhabitants. It's hard to find a place in Johto that doesn't have a historic structure. It's absolutely brimming with history. Cianwood City, for example, houses the Pokémon world's oldest apothecary. It's because of this history that it's kind of difficult to draw the line between ruins and old, but still current places of reverence. The Dragon's Den, another example, is pretty old, but people still use it and clearly remember its purpose, so it's not really ruins. Due to the region's focus on tradition, we don't have to do much guesswork here. This part of the video is a welcome respite for me in that regard. If we're counting truly abandoned, lost to time ruins, I can only think of a precious few in the Johto region. The first is the Ilex Forest Shrine. It's wooden, so it probably isn't too terribly old. The shrine is the source of a few events. The first in Crystal, wherein bringing the GS ball to it starts an encounter with the out-of-time Pokémon, Celebi. The second involves bringing a special shiny Pichu to it in Heart Gold Soul Silver, which likewise causes the spiky-eared Pichu to join your team. It approaches with an old man who explains that the shrine is typically avoided because children in Pokemon have a tendency to disappear around it. That's a little bit of a bummer. But Pokemon do have a precedent of disappearing children. Celebi doesn't get as bad of a rap as Hypno or Drifloon though. The final event kind of sheds some light on that. Celebi is most likely taking them to other times, as it does when we bring it to the shrine in Heart Gold Soul Silver. In our case, it brings us to a few years prior to the game to witness Giovanni's exile, before returning us to whence we came. Why doesn't Celebi return to others though? Once is an anomaly, a rumor. But multiple cases is confirmation, and probably what ended up motivating the people of Johto to avoid the shrine. Spooky stuff. It's kind of not a ruin, but I wanted an excuse to highlight the developmental history of it anyway. Apparently, the developers created this area for Gold and Silver and promptly forgot about why it was added. Rumors surrounding the shrine after the release of Gold and Silver inspired Game Freak to create the event for it in Crystal, according to an interview that I'll link below. It is not in English though, so be aware of that. The event didn't make its way to the US until the Virtual Console release of Crystal on the 3DS. In Japan, you could get the GS Ball through use of the mobile Game Boy adapter and the internet. They really liked their peripherals back in the day. Is it just me, or does the e-reader look like a stupid hat for the Game Boy? But I digest. The second of the true non-Alph ruins of the Johto region is the Burned Tower. Almost a millennia ago, the brass and tin towers were erected in Ekritique City. 150 years ago, the brass tower was struck by lightning and caught fire. According to legend, for 3 days the fire raged, until a sudden rainstorm put it out. Unfortunately, in that time, it had burned to a crisp, and 3 Pokemon trapped inside had perished. When the rainstorm cleared, Ho-Oh descended and restored the Pokemon to life, creating Raikou, Entei, and Suicune as we know them. The people rejected them though, in fear of the Pokemon's power. That caused the legends of the region to become reclusive, and scant few sightings occurred before the events of the games. The third place I want to talk about in this Johto section is actually related to the Hoenn region. In Heart Gold Soul Silver only, on Route 47 only, you can find the remains of a great tower embedded in the cliffside, the Embedded Tower. According to Professor Oak, it was built by people from the Hoenn region in order to honor the 3 Pokemon from their legends: Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza. It went deep underground into the ocean and high into the clouds, connecting the earth, sea, and sky in one single monument. Now, it's just ruins. It has the distinction of being the only place outside of Hoenn where you can catch the 3 super ancient Pokemon on their own. Subsequent methods of capture have lumped them with other legendaries, such as the Ultra Space Wilds or the Max Raid Lair. There's nothing inherently wrong with those places, they just kind of remove some of the spectacle and unique features of battling a legendary Pokemon. They're there to fill your decks with little extra fluff. I kind of miss that fluff. You also require the red and blue orbs to capture Kyogre and Groudon, which can't be said for even Paldea. That presents its own set of questions. In the Hoenn region, the red and blue orbs are very sacred. It's a huge deal when Team Aqua and Magma steal them from atop Mount Pyre, and yet Mr. Pokemon gets his hands on them and gifts them to us. These are priceless artifacts. Oh, I guess they do have a price. 10,000 Pokédollars. Okay, but that still doesn't explain why there's suddenly a Jade Orb that brings out Rayquaza. It's never mentioned outside of Heart Gold Soul Silver. If you recall, while the red and blue orbs became Mega Stones for Kyogre and Groudon, Rayquaza needs no such item to Mega Evolve, so the Jade Orb was just made obsolete. I think we do know who created these ruins specifically. The Draconid are a people who, like their name implies, have a strong connection to Dragon-type Pokemon, and they've admired Rayquaza for millennia. In the Hoenn region, the Draconid erected the Sky Pillar for the express purpose of revering and summoning Rayquaza on demand, just like you can do with all 3 super ancient Pokemon at the Embedded Tower. Worth mentioning is that the Draconid were invented for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and have no mention in the originals. Although the 2 sets of games take place in alternate continuities, that doesn't mean they can't exist in the Game Boy Advance games. Structures attributed to them in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire still exist in Ruby Sapphire and Emerald. Unlike the previously mentioned Celestica people, the Draconid never really disappeared. Likely, as the world became safer, there was less need to devote time and energy toward worship of legendary Pokemon for safety. This is pretty true of all societies in the Pokemon world. In the case of the Draconid, I think they mingled with the other people in Hoenn, if they existed, losing most of their sense of identity over time. Dedicated lore keepers such as Zinnia exist, but in very few numbers. She informs us that Groudon and Kyogre battle every 1,000 years or so, which makes it important to have knowledge of countering them. Zinnia's knowledge, and by extension the Draconid's knowledge, doesn't seem to end with the Hoenn region. She's acutely aware of the war in Kalos leading up to the ultimate weapon from 3,000 years prior, and even mentions truth and ideals at one point. Combined with the existence of the Embedded Tower, this knowledge suggests that the Draconid people traveled about the world, or had other ways of keeping up on world news. And the Braille writing people made their way to Kanto, if they're a distinct group. Oh, the things in this video Zinnia could clear up. The Sky Pillar is among the most prominent of the Draconid ruins. As mentioned previously, the tower was constructed in order to revere Rayquaza. This most recent time was probably the most severe clash of super ancient Pokemon that the Hoenn region had ever seen. A devastating meteor struck, creating the crater that houses current-day Sootopolis City, exposing the subterranean layer of the super ancient Pokemon, and setting them loose upon the world. Rayquaza saved the day once again, and so the people erected the Sky Pillar in order to summon its power in another 1,000 years. That's about how old the pillar is, and the next time Rayquaza was needed was 1,000 years later during the events of the Hoenn games. A mural inside tells this story. Meteor Falls is the ancestral home of the Draconid people. They sought refuge from the clashes between Kyogre and Groudon in ancient time, and the meteors that fell containing Megastones empowered them to defend themselves. I have an inkling that their tendency to dwell in caves may suggest that they were responsible for sealing away the Regis. The only problem is we don't see Braille and ruins we can definitively tie the Draconid to. Either that or all the people of Hoenn lived in caves at one point. It does make sense to want to take refuge from the planet-altering battles of the super ancient Pokemon, and the planet itself makes wonderful natural fortresses. Hoenn actually has a lot of distinct caves as far as regions go. I think there's a good amount of evidence that the falls are natural rather than artificial. For one, they're one of the few caves in the Pokemon series with running water. That, combined with the color of the cave and overall vibe, makes me think it's a limestone cave, which are among the most common in our world. They're called solutional, or karst caves, which are formed by water seeping into porous stone and dissolving it. While I think the Draconid were more than capable of creating something like this on their own, as evidenced by the majesty of the Sky Pillar, the cave just looks natural. I don't know how to describe it better than that. The only sign of civilization in the modern-day Meteor Falls is the bridge over them. I don't count the ladders necessarily because every cave in the Pokemon world has them. They're not a good benchmark. An example of a cave I think the Draconid did make, or at least artificially extend, is the Granite Cave of Dewford Town. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire at least, there are plenty of stairs and intentional looking pathways. The final part of the room is a prime example of this, with a hallway leading up to a mural telling Groudon and Kyogre's part of the Draconid's history. It's a counterpart to the Sky Tower in that regard. Given the shrine and connection to the super ancient Pokemon, I imagine Sootopolis City was once a Draconid stronghold, but I could find no sources directly supporting this idea. The crater makes a naturally impenetrable fortress, which could be good for a people escaping devastation. I also really want to mention that the tree in front of the Cave of Origin was planted by a tall man from Kalos 1,000 years prior. The only ruin-ish place in Hoenn that we can't concretely attribute to the Draconid is Mirage Tower in Pokemon Emerald. It's an anomaly that disappears after one climbs to the 4th floor and chooses a fossil. It might not even be real given the name. Perhaps some kind of desert Pokemon has the capacity to create sand-based illusions? How exactly would a load-bearing fossil get up into an artificial structure though? There's no definitive answer, and it didn't return for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Relic Castle takes the ideas of the Mirage Tower and greatly expands upon them. An NPC even mentions the tower in Black and White too. Relic Castle is a grand underground structure that has been buried in the sand over millennia. We actually witnessed this, as floors from black and white become inaccessible due to shifting sand several years later. The ruins are actually connected to much of southern Unova via cave tunnels, as seen in the sequels. They most likely occupy a good chunk of underground Unova, these are just the ones we can see. So how old are they? Professor Juniper herself dates the inert Darmanitan outside to around 2500 years old. Something caused them to shut down around that time, to my understanding. We can reawaken them with a Rage Candy Bar, which is interesting. These Darmanitan just might be some of the oldest Pokemon with a confirmed age that we can catch. Recent excavations uncovered either the light or dark stone depending on whether you played black or white respectively. It was put on display in Lenora's Nakreen Museum, which I touched upon in my video on museums in the Pokemon world. The other ended up in Celestial Tower, which I touched upon in my video about graveyards in the Pokemon world. Like and subscribe while you're at it if you like this video so far. The Dragon Stones discovered here contained Reshiram and Zekrom after their disappearance in ancient times. That, combined with a remark from an NPC, places the Relic Castle as a place that was once under the influence of one or both of the brothers of Unovan legend. One, though, I think, ended up being dominant. Or at least his ideology got the edge. Whether it was the older hero of truth with his Reshiram, or the younger hero of ideals and his Zekrom, depends on your version. This isn't just an arbitrary difference, though. Depending on which brother ended up in control here, more of the civilization remains out on Route 4. Given the Black 2 timelines focus on the future and modernity, you may be unsurprised to know that more ruins remain in the White 2 timeline. I can see this meaning two things. Either the older brother put more emphasis on infrastructure and lasting, while the younger one was more concerned with change and advancement, or Zekrom was more destructive to the Relic Castle's infrastructure than Reshiram. If you don't know the story of the twin heroes of Unova, it goes as follows. Millennia ago, there were two brothers who lived in the area we now call Unova. They created it using a single powerful dragon Pokemon. They had brought peace to the land, but disagreed on how to keep it. The older brothers sought truth, while the younger sought ideals. They had it in their minds that only one of them could be right, and so they decided to fight. As a result, the dragon Pokemon they used to bring Unova into existence split into two. Reshiram sided with the older brother and his truth, and Zekrom with the younger and his ideals. What ensued was an exhausting battle in which neither side prevailed. Reshiram and Zekrom were cut from the same cloth, you see. The twin heroes wisely realized that neither of them was necessarily right. They were equally strong and equally correct. Truth and ideals could coexist. But the sons of the heroes disagreed. They started the conflict of their fathers anew. And this time, Reshiram and Zekrom razed the Unova region to the ground with their fire and lightning. Then they disappeared. It's not known what happened after that, but the region did recover and the dragons were turned to stone spheres. Now, I want to address a few things from the Unovan myth. The brothers are widely considered to be the founders of Unova, and that was at least 2,500 years ago. Different sources who tell us this myth in-game differ. Drayden uses more vague language, while N states that the role of the brothers in creating Unova was literal. I think it's likely that the latter was fed propaganda from Ghetsis and believed it wholeheartedly. What other choice did he have? Instead, I think the brothers likely did something along the lines of bringing peace with the dragon through subduing warlords or protecting people. They became unifiers of Unova. The time of the Pokemon world 3 millennia ago was very dangerous. The games frequently throw out 3,000 years ago when it comes to massive calamities. In Hoenn, the manifestations of the land and sea themselves were clashing as they do every 1,000 years. In Kalos, a great war broke out in which a king stricken with grief unleashed a terrible weapon upon the world. A sleeping titan awoke in Galar, covering the region in darkness. Oddly, Melmetal is stated to have died out around the same time too. My point is, around this time, something bad was happening to everyone around the world. Some bounced back, some didn't. I think Unova fell into that latter category, or at least was disorganized until two brothers came along with the Dragon-type Pokemon and founded Unova. Again, the game dates the Darmanitan Sentinels outside as existing for about 2,500 years, so the city surely existed long before then, probably closer to 3,000 years ago than not. The Relic Castle was the seat of the brothers' power for a time. It then fell into ruin, probably after the conflict of their sons. Then the city gradually sank beneath the sand. I'm not sure the city's disappearance was immediate, because the remains of Reshiram and Zekrom were interred within the castle. I imagine the timeline to go something like this. About 3,000 years ago, Unova was lawless. There's record of a massive oceanic event happening around that time. More on that in a bit. Maybe a century after that, 2,900 years ago, the brothers unified Unova and had their clash. A generation later, their sons set Relic Castle and its civilization on the decline by setting Reshiram and Zekrom upon the world. Over the next few centuries, without the legendary Pokémon to guide them and act as enforcers, the people slowly died out and/or left. And by 2500 years ago, either something bad enough happened to make the Darmanitan transform into their stone forms, or there was just no one around to attack or defend. There was no one left motivated enough to live around the Relic Castle. It's possible the area wasn't even a desert at the time. I think the decline was gradual for a number of reasons. The first is that the civilization was supposedly very impressive. If it sprung up and was gone in a generation, I don't think it would have had the same historical impact. Also, what does remain is very intact, just buried in the sand. Finally, if it was completely destroyed along with the region and everyone died, who would have lived to remember and pass down the legends? It seems to me that Unova as we know it was founded by the brothers, and if it was some other kingdom or known by another name, surely someone would have mentioned that. There is another location of note in Unova that is rumored to be involved with the brothers. Perhaps we can shed some light on ancient Unova by exploring it. The Abyssal Ruins can be found off the coast of Undella at the bottom of Undella Bay. The map description tells us that it's an ancient tomb said to contain the remains of a great king. There are a grand total of 47 treasures you can find in the place, 15 elemental plates, and millions of Pokédollars and relics from an ancient civilization. The description of most relic items places them at about 3,000 years old. There's that number again. So the place is at least that old, but who knows when it flooded. Navigating the place requires the decoding of many purple pillars within the depths. The pillars give you instructions on how to navigate the place in addition to a brief recorded history of the inhabitants. Each symbol corresponds to a letter of the English alphabet in the English language games. They're meant to be read backwards, so this becomes... For each floor you advance, you shift a letter forward, so this becomes... Life is gratitude. It's not so tough once you get it, and in black and white too, an NPC helps with the decoding. However, there is a problem with the decoded ciphers in English. Due to the character limit, the messages are a lot more to the point than in the original Japanese, where more ideas can be expressed in less space. For example, the message, "Primes lead to truth," in English is, "Those who understand prime numbers understand the truth of the world," in Japanese. That is a lot different and way more useful because you're supposed to follow the prime numbered turns in front of you. It isn't just the hints that are lost in translation, but the history of the people of the Abyssal Ruins also. The king was someone who believed in a middle ground between right and wrong. He could speak with all living beings and was able to read the future in order to save his people from a great tsunami. That sort of rules out the idea that the ruins were always underwater. The ruins appear to be an intentional guide, with the treasure left behind for someone who would be considered worthy by the king. At the end, you can find a relic crown worth 300,000 Pokédollars to the right collector. The place is strange, and remember how I wondered how it ended up underwater? There's some evidence to suggest that it was either intentionally flooded or the king knew it would end up underwater and prepared accordingly. You see, you have a certain amount of tiles you can traverse within the ruins before a defense mechanism ejects you. The glyphs on the wall warn you to be intentional and swift. It's quite sophisticated. A lot of sources online attribute Abyssal Ruins to the brothers, but I'm not convinced. But if that were the case, I think we can make some safe assumptions about at least who he would have been in relation to the brothers. If he was one of the brothers, he would have become king after the battle with the other brother. The king didn't believe in extremes, after all. In opposition to this idea, though, is that truth and ideals are never mentioned in the glyphs. Neither is any dragon. The subtle detail that holds a lot of weight in my mind is that this place has no version differences, whereas the ruins in the desert do. Really, the only connection to them is that they existed at about the same time in the same region. If he was related to them, he most likely came before them rather than being one of them. There's about a 500-year gap between a city all but confirmed to be associated with them, and this ruin that has a passing mention by someone decidedly not an expert. As I stated earlier, the king probably had special powers. These special powers are, as far as I can tell, only associated with the brothers once by the researcher Zinzalin. Yeah, that's right. One of the Team Plasma sages helps us to decode the ruins, by the way. Apparently Getsus researched the place extensively, which begs the question, why were they so interested in the Abyssal Ruins when all of their other interests were world domination? If I may direct your attention to the opening cutscene of the game, where N is crowned with something that greatly resembles the relic crown I mentioned earlier. Oh yeah, wait a minute. Doesn't N possess the power to communicate with Pokémon? A power that the King of the Abyssal Ruins once possessed? Now would be the perfect time to tell you that at the bottom of the Abyssal Ruins there are 4 words which can't be translated. 3 of them have been highly debated for the past decade or so. However, one of them is pretty widely accepted to have been cracked. It's a word that changes its character length across languages, conveniently lining up with a character whose name also changes across languages with the same amount of characters. Harmonia. If you didn't know, N's full name is Natural Harmonia Gropius. While a little bit out there, N is also connected to prime numbers like the Old King. His battle-themed arpeggios ascend according to prime numbers if you begin counting from middle C. And that isn't Illuminati-confirmed rambling, that comes straight from a 2011 blog post by Junichi Masuda. And now the pieces fall into place. At some point, Getsus became aware that N possessed powers similar to that of a powerful Univan king, and he moved to manipulate him. Getsus likely gave him the name Harmonia in order to solidify his claim as an inheritor of that legacy. I think it could be possible that N is a descendant, but with how much lying Getsus and Zinzalin do in order to achieve their goals, it could just be a coincidence. I do not believe, though, that we can at this point safely tie either N or the Ancient King to the brothers of the Univan legend. The final cementing piece in my mind that prevents me from making a claim like this is that over the course of the game, we bring the dragons back with N, but we, the player, possess no abilities like N and no confirmed link to him. There's also nothing tying the dragons to the Abyssal King, except that they were possessed by people who Zinzalin claimed shared abilities with the king. And again, he worked with Getsus to manipulate N and the Unova region to fit his idealized worldview. Not exactly a reliable source, especially when he's trying to motivate us to explore the ruins on his behalf. Overall, I think the only concrete link between the player character, N, the King of the Abyssal Ruins, and the Brothers of Univan legend, is that N and the King of the Abyssal Ruins shared abilities. Overall, I think the only concrete link between the player character, N, the King of the Abyssal Ruins, and the Brothers of Univan legend, is that N and the King of the Abyssal Ruins share abilities and most likely a name. Any other potential link isn't so solid. Again, I don't think it's impossible that the king is either one of the brothers or related to them, but I don't think evidence points in that direction. There are a lot of mysteries that we may never see elaborated on in the Unova region. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the movie continuities, which invent a whole backstory for some of the ancient characters, but I don't hold much stock in their validity to the events of the games. Meloetta, for example, is found in the Abyssal Ruins in the anime. Also, because you find the elemental plates here, some believe the Abyssal Ruins are related to Arceus. However, because the plates are found in sets all over the Pokemon world, I don't think their presence is a good indicator of any kind of specific worship. As the hiker from Sinjo said, some folklore in the Pokemon world echoes others. I wish we knew more, but hot dog if the Abyssal Ruins weren't a fun thing to decode back in the day. There is someone in the Pokemon games that may be able to shed some light on all this, though. He's a character who survived 3,000 years, that magic number, and will be appearing in the upcoming Legends ZA. Yep. AZ the Wanderer, one of my most favorite characters in the Pokemon series, has seen it all. If you aren't aware of AZ's story, his goes something like this. Over 3,000 years prior to X and Y, a war had broken out between Kalos and another, currently unknown power. Pokemon were used as tools to solve disputes, and the precious Floette belonging to the king, AZ, was no exception. It died in the conflict, and in his grief, AZ devised a machine that could bring his companion back to life. However, his heart had grown bitter by the loss, and instead of merely restoring what was lost, AZ sought revenge as well. His restoration machine became the ultimate weapon, and it was used on both sides of the conflict in order to end it, vengefully, once and for all. Floette was restored to life, but it couldn't bear to remain in AZ's presence. He had been transformed by his desire for revenge and exposure to the machine. He grew to 9 feet tall and gained an unnaturally long lifespan as a result of his meddling with life and death. According to documents obtained by Lysander Labs, AZ's brother later buried the ultimate weapon that Team Flare excavated as part of its scheme. 3,000 years later, we meet AZ in XY, and battling with the player causes him to fully let go the hate in his heart, and Floette returns to him. By the yet unreleased Legends ZA, he's become the proprietor of Hotel Z, and seems to be in better shape than the last time we saw him. We can assume he's been all over the world, with at least Hoenn confirmed to have been visited by him. He planted the Tree of Origin, according to Wallace, and witnessed the last clash between Groudon and Kyogre 1,000 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if he had been to Unova before or after his immortality. If I was unnaturally longevic, I'd probably do my fair share of wandering as well. I'm very excited to see what sort of little tidbits they sprinkle into the games about AZ's past. Perhaps a follow-up to this video will be in order after that game releases. Regardless of how one feels about modern Pokemon games, one has to admit that Game Freak still takes care in tying their games together. Although we may not see them because ZA takes place in Lumio City, Kalos has plenty of ruins that aren't elaborated upon. The exception would be the Standing Stones of Route 11, which I elaborated upon in my Graveyards video. Essentially, each stone is a marker for a Pokemon whose life was drained by the ultimate weapon. The weapon itself is in Geosenge Town. Ruins can be found on and in Victory Road, but like the ruins of Mount Pyre and in modern Pokemon games, they are undated. They're more set pieces than mysteries. There are no answers about them, and they're almost too up to interpretation. Kalos is a historied region with many of the castles we can visit standing for centuries. These ruins could be a few hundred or a few thousand years old. There just isn't a way for us to know. Please, Game Freak, let AZ tell us everything that I want to know specifically. Thank you. The Alola region is traditional, similar to Johto. For that reason, a lot of the buildings and places in the region feel more like historical sites than they do ruins. In a lot of cases, they still serve a purpose in the present day. The ruins of the Guardians come to mind. Tapu Koko, Lele, Bulu, and Finny all have shrines dedicated to them, and despite them not being fully abandoned, they are called ruins. People still worship them, and they still offer protection. We actually visit them at a very interesting time in Alola's history. The region is currently undergoing rapid modernization, which is leading to a loss of tradition and reverence for spiritual Pokemon. Resorts and supermarkets are becoming more and more common, and tourism of people who just don't get it is a major export. Nearly every region we can visit has some sort of history of deification of Pokemon, but Alola is the only one we can visit wherein the revered Pokemon have operated uninterrupted. Kanto has no such history. In Johto, although the traditions are kept alive, the attitudes of a few bad actors several centuries prior caused Ho-Oh and Lugia to go into hiding. In Hoenn, Rayquaza only needs to come into work once every 1,000 years. Sinnoh forgot its roots long ago, and the legendaries really only come out after significant mortal meddling. The revered legendaries of Unova, Kalos, Galar, and Paldea were mostly sealed away. Now that I think about it, it seems like the present of the Pokemon games is a period of reawakening of old legends. It almost makes me feel as if a major shakeup is coming, what with all the monthly catastrophes being thwarted. The Guardians of Alola have been around forever though, and make their presence known fairly regularly. Tapu Bulu seems to be the most vengeful of them all, with at least 2 places known to have been destroyed by it. Tapu Village itself, but also the thrifty Megamart. Like Johto, the ruins in Alola don't really hold any mystery, and that's fine. It really speaks to the longevity and tradition of the people of the region. The ancient people of Alola lived simple lives except for when it came to revering legendary Pokemon, it seems. The Altar of the Sun and the Moon and the Lake of the Sun and the Moon are both very elaborate stone structures tied to Solgaleo, Lunala, and Necrozma. They're entirely intentional, as it seems the lines between dimensions are more easily blurred at these locations. It's light work to punch ultra wormholes at these places, and I think the stone structures were intended to survive anything that could come through. They're remarkably well kept. Time has not been kind to the ruins on Pony Island near Seafolk Village comparatively. Practically everything there is crumbling save for the buildings that Hapu and her family occupy. I have a few theories as to why so few of the abandoned ruins in Alola are in good shape. The first is that all of their architectural prowess went toward reverence of deified Pokemon. Their own living spaces were of a lower priority or required less staying power. It could be that there's some sort of power keeping the altar and lake structures intact. I also think it's plausible that they just weren't as lived in. Either that or some sort of legendary Pokemon created them, but I think that line of thinking is dangerously Ancient Aliens adjacent. The ruins of Alola are few and far between. The Galar region is historic, for sure, with many cities and structures described as dating back to ancient times. The games themselves are also focused around uncovering the ancient history of Galar and piecing it together. Because of that, I think I'll just be talking about the truly abandoned or forgotten ruins of Galar. Before I do that, I figure I might as well take you through the history of Galar. 3,000 years ago, that magical number, the extraterrestrial Pokemon Eternatus woke from thousands of years of hibernation, causing the Dynamax phenomenon to awaken for the first time. The region was in a state of chaos known as the Darkest Day. 2 youths met Zacian and Zamazenta, using their power to quell Eternatus and restore order. The 2 youths were declared kings, founding the Kingdom of Galar as we know it. Like regions before it, we don't hear of any sort of political upheaval, so it's not complete nonsense to assume that any ruins we can find in the region are the remnants of ancient Galarian society. The wild area is peppered with old stone structures that give it some flavor, but not much else. The Watchtower Ruins with its ghost Pokemon has intrigued me since release. Unfortunately, it's pretty much just a flavorful raid den. It probably served as an ancient watchtower for the nearby city, although it's not really in a better vantage point than the city's buildings. Galar Route 8 is very cool. Navigating through the crumbling ruins while avoiding mostly Unova Pokemon is a fun prospect. I really wish there was more to uncover about it. Please, if you know more, let me know. But as far as I can tell, it's just a creative route. If I had to take a guess, though, I think it was probably some sort of ancient suburb or offshoot of Hammerlock. The fortress walls of that city are described as dating back to the Middle Ages of the Pokemon world, so perhaps no one wanted to live outside the city walls after their construction. And thus, the Route 8 ruins fell into disrepair. I'm not sure one can truly call them abandoned anymore though, because it seems the local phalanx treat the place like their own little fortress. Stow-on-Side is a sadly realistic depiction of historic archaeological cities. Trinkets and artifacts are sold at the open-air market for a quick buck, but thankfully many of the larger points of interest remain. Anyway, as one enters or leaves the city via Route 6, they're greeted by these gigantic statues of Diglett, or is it a Dugtrio? Truly an archaeological debate for the ages. We don't know exactly who carved them or for what purpose, but they sure are neat. The biggest draw here, though, is the ancient mural of the heroes, which Bede unfortunately destroyed, which fortunately revealed this statue of the heroes. It's cool, but I wish he hadn't done that. Leading up to the site are these colorful Claydol columns. I dig them. Between Yamask, Runarigus, and the mural and statues of Stow-on-Side, I think it's safe to say that the ancient Galarians liked painting. Their ruins were probably much more colorful than they appear today. If you didn't know, a lot of Greco-Roman statues and pillars were not originally white like we imagine them. I bet a glimpse into the ancient past of the region would reveal far more color than it lets on. That's probably true of the Celestica ruins too, now that I think about it, but who knows, considering Arceus is white and gold like the ruins of the day. I should also mention the Slumbering Wealds Shrine. It has to be about 3,000 years old if the tale of the Darkest Day is to be believed. That's around when Zacian and Zamazenta retreated into their stone forms following the founding of the region. I've got to say, Galar has some of the coolest, if a little underdeveloped, ruins in the Pokemon series. The Paldea region has the distinction of being described as a former empire. I don't think any society in the game continuity shares that distinction. At one point, for about 1,000 years, that empire ruled over the region before falling into ruin and unifying with its neighbors into the Paldea we know and love to this day. There are practically no ruins in this game, unfortunately, unless you count the Treasures of Ruin, which I don't, because they're Pokemon and not the crumbling remains of human civilization. The areas you can find them in, though, might be considered as such, but again, I don't, because they were meant to be forgotten about. I might as well tell you a bit about them if you haven't looked into their lore. Essentially, sometime during the millennia-long rule of the Paldean Empire, between 2,000 and 1,000 years prior to the events of Scarlet and Violet, the leader of Paldea was brought 4 treasures by a merchant hailing from the east. The treasures turned out to be destructive Pokemon that threatened the region before being sealed away. They welcome disaster, and you can just catch them, and they're really good in PvP, I think. I like Chi-Yu because it's like one of the quirky goldfish that I like, and the snail one looks like that episode of Adventure Time. The only real ruins in Paldea are the towers one can find scattered about the region. Before the unification I mentioned, they were utilized to keep an eye on the borders of the Empire. Nowadays, they're pretty much just places to find Gimmighoul and take massive amounts of fall damage. There is one tower, though, that's considered one of the 10 sites of Paldea and is even advertised by the tourism board, the Leaking Tower of Paldea. Located at the bottom of a waterfall near Alfornada, it's truly a sight to behold when the game isn't lagging profusely. Honestly, I think the Paldea region kinda skimps on ruins for the sake of the continuous overworld. I'd much prefer the take of Legends Arceus on an open world. In a lot of cases, I think not separating the provinces of Paldea negatively affects my enjoyment of the games. If you hadn't noticed, the contents of this video are a little front-heavy. Ruins have fallen out of favor when it comes to being a vehicle for background lore. Since the late 3DS era, ruins just haven't hit the way they used to. Of course, there are exceptions like Galar and Hisui, but we used to have an uninterrupted chain of interesting ruins to explore. I would say Generation 2 through 6 was the golden era of ruin exploration in Pokemon. Nowadays, ruins are just relegated to set pieces, and they don't feature as heavily in the types of stories being told with the Pokemon games. That's completely fine in my opinion. Ruins obviously don't make a Pokemon game good, bad, or even more enjoyable. They're just one of the types of areas in Pokemon that I find endlessly interesting. I was going to end this video with a top 3 ranking, but I honestly can't decide. The Unknown Ruins, the Reggie Ruins, and the Ruins of Unova are my top 3 in no particular order. Each of them has their own unique, distinct set of charms that set them apart from each other. The Unknown Ruins feel like, to me, a statement in the void proclaiming, I was here, don't forget about me. They're quite alien places, and the mystery of the unknown is fun to try and unravel. A new Unknown Ruin hasn't cropped up in a Pokemon game in almost 20 years now. Unknown Ruins have appeared as late as 2022 in Legends Arceus, but it was a revisit to a previous one. I really wonder what sort of new ruin we could see next. For all I talked about them in the video, I'm still just as mystified as I was listening to the strange radio broadcast for the first time all those years ago. The Reggie Ruins, to me, are everything I want in exploration in a Pokemon game. Finding them yourselves, even if you use a guide, truly feels like an adventure. As a kid, I remember setting aside an entire afternoon just to track down the Reggies in Emerald. Because they were tough to catch, it took me well until past bedtime. The glow of my DS, my only companion in the dark. Needing to catch them in Gen 3 and transferring them up to Diamond and Pearl to catch Regigigas was something else as a kid, let me tell you. I was very pleased to see them return in the Crown Tundra, with new additions to the family to boot. I actually knew close to nothing about the Ruins of Unova before researching this video. I was completely blindsided by all the lore to uncover. I had been to the treasure room in the Abyssal Ruins before, but I guess I somehow missed all the juicy information about the backstory of the Unova region. That's probably why they stopped going so hard when it came to places like this. It went completely over my head until recently. But man, if it doesn't make me want some kind of a return to Unova. The past of the Pokemon world is filled with all sorts of mysteries, and Legends Arceus shows that Game Freak isn't opposed to setting their games in the distant past. We could see returns to these ruins in their prime, at which point I would jump for joy. For now though, all we have is what remains, defiantly lasting into our time. Museums are so interesting to me because they contain objects and information that people think is worth preserving and remembering. The dinosaur bones are a plus. I think what we put behind glass will say a lot about us as a species when we're long gone. It's for those reasons that fictional museums are also interesting to me. What a fictional culture or world find worth preserving is a lesser thought about but very enlightening detail. Not just that, they're devices for creators to teach us, the media viewers, little details about a world to make it feel more alive. The Pokemon world is one such world. Across the 9, almost 10 generations of Pokemon games, Game Freak has presented many museums with varying focuses. As I said about graveyards in my Graveyards video, it's interesting to me that something like a museum would be depicted in Pokemon games before something like a town hall or government. Museums have been in the game since the very first installment, and they've come a very long way since the Game Boy. Unfortunately though, unless I'm mistaken, we haven't seen a new one in just about a decade. So today, I thought I would take a look at the exhibits available for us to visit in the Pokemon world, and make a case for their eventual return. Honestly though, I'm doubtful, as Pokemon games seem to be taking a shift to more outdoor environments. Scarlet and Violet famously lacked interiors basically everywhere. But I will say, one of the museums mentioned today is in Lumiose City, the setting for the upcoming Legends ZA. If that museum doesn't show up in that game, I would be shocked if we ever saw a Pokemon museum ever again. Will this video age like milk, or will it age like wine? Come back in a year. For now though, let's talk about the museums in the Pokemon world. As you're probably used to me saying by now, we begin our journey in the Kanto region. Pewter City houses the Pewter Museum of Science, which contains permanent exhibits about the nearby Mount Moon and rotating ones on space. As is common with science museums in real life, the fossil exhibits are a pretty big hit among the visitors. In particular, they have seemingly complete specimens of both Aerodactyl and Kabutops. In real life, complete skeletal fossils are extremely rare, so it's possible that the two specimens are composite skeletons composed of multiple individuals or have their gaps filled in with plaster substitutes. Now all that said, I am willing to believe that the Kabutops at least is a complete individual skeleton. According to multiple Pokedex entries, Kabuto never went extinct, so members of its lineage have had a lot of time on the planet to become fossils. Also, marine life, in particular invertebrates, are very well represented in the fossil record. In contrast, a land-dwelling pterosaur analog like Aerodactyl would be much less likely to leave behind a complete fossil. so I would be surprised if Pewter had one on display. I think there being a lack of Aerodactyl fossils in general, let alone complete ones, is supported by how we use something other than fossilized body parts to revive one for ourselves. Old Amber is a standout among fossils in that it doesn't contain a concrete piece of the Pokemon we get at all. It is described as genetic material. Also supporting this lack of Aerodactyl fossils is how in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the first time we see the fossil exhibits outside of a text box, Kabutops is the only one with a fully articulated and cleaned specimen. The Aerodactyl exhibit does not retain a full specimen. Instead, there's both a lifelike statue and a partial Aerodactyl fossil still in the rock they found it in. Pewter's fossil collection appears to be popular enough that the museum loans them out to others by the time of the Johto games. I'm not certain if they've traveled to somewhere we know, however. That could be a cool detail in a future game, seeing the Kabutops exhibit in another region. I'm generally a fan of cross-regional references like that, or older characters having cameos. More on that later. The Pewter Museum also houses monthly exhibits, like their one on space. This one allows us to observe how Game Freak's attitudes on real-world references changed over time. Here on the second floor, we can see a scale model of the Space Shuttle Columbia, which is famous for being the first reusable spacecraft. Unfortunately, the average Joe probably knows it better for another reason. On February 1st, 2003, upon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart and disintegrated due to damage sustained during its launch. By Fire Red and Leaf Green's 2005 English release, they scrubbed all mention of the spacecraft's name. By Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, it was just known as the Space Shuttle across all languages. I have a hunch this contributed to the internal separation of the real and Pokemon worlds. Also worth mentioning, this old man's dialogue goes from about watching the moon landing in 1969 to how people of the Pokemon world are encroaching upon a red planet. Gen 10 set on Mars confirmed. They also have meteorites thought to be moonstones on display, which is an interesting thought. Moonstones have sort of always been set apart from the other evolution stones. Up until Gen 4, they were the only ones that couldn't be sold or bought, making it a little bit more difficult to obtain all the Pokemon that evolved from it. Perhaps this is reflective of their extraterrestrial nature. It isn't reliable to obtain them on Earth because they don't originate from Earth. The most consistent way we can obtain a Moonstone is as a held item from Pokemon commonly thought to be extraterrestrial. I myself got a Moonstone from a shiny Lunatone. That isn't really relevant, it was just cool and I wanted to brag about it. I've gotta say, it's very cool that so many museums also revive fossils. The only standard machines I see at museums in real life are the ones that turn pennies into weirder pennies. In the Pokemon universe though, they're just out here creating new life, which, by the way, I wrote a whole section for this video about Pokemon fossils and the restoration process, and it ended up being way too long of a tangent, to the point where I think it merits its own video. If that interests you, like and subscribe to be notified whenever that drops. For now though, I think I've talked enough about Kanto. On to the Hoenn region. The Oceanic Museum in Slateport City is perhaps the most true-to-life depiction of a museum across the Pokemon series. It's a museum dedicated to the ocean, which is, important to the Hoenn region. It stands out as being perhaps the most informative museum from both a meta and in-game perspective, due to its focus on concepts not exclusive to the Pokemon world. Very few of the text boxes you can read in here are about actual Pokemon. If you wanted a lesson on water salinity and buoyancy, Slateport City is the place to go. I quite enjoy it when Pokemon games have mini science lessons in them, and here we have an entire area dedicated to them. And the best part? They overhauled the museum in Generation 6. Almost all of the exhibits from the originals have fully functional visual representations in the remakes. It quite reminds me of interactive museums such as Discovery World in Milwaukee, where the exhibits aren't composed of objects of note, but demonstrations. Being a kid is going to the museum to see dinosaurs. Being an adult is going to the museum to see a buoyant ball. Something odd to take note of is that in Ruby and Sapphire, there are water samples labeled as being from Kanto and Hoenn. In Emerald, these references are scrubbed, and I have no idea why. Even more baffling is that in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they added more water samples and went back to labeling them as being from prior regions. They expand upon this concept by noting what the qualities of the water from each region are like. Johto water is hinted to be more salty, Sinnoh's has a high mineral content being snowmelt, and Kalos's waters are noted as having calcium and magnesium that exceeds 300 parts per million. Can you call yourself a true Kalos fan if you don't know the region's water hardness? Water samples aren't all they have on the second floor though. The museum also houses scale models of nearly every major seafaring vessel we can encounter in the Pokemon series up to this point. The SS Anne, the Royal Unova, even the submarine that Team Aqua and Magma steal from Captain Stern. In Gen 3 though, there's references to the abandoned ship, or the SS Cactus. This generational disconnect makes me wonder why no one at all mentions Sea Mauville. a pretty prominent place in Hoenn's history. I have a video about abandoned areas in Pokemon games that touches upon both places if you're interested. Oh, and as a side note, I have come to question Captain Stern's credentials. Apparently that's a nickname, not a title. Regardless, he seems pretty competent, and I don't know that the Pokemon world does formal higher education like we do. All this talk of water and salinity has left me quite drained, and I need a more refined way to recharge my batteries. Why don't we stop by the Lily Cove Art Museum, the first art gallery in the mainline series. The gallery at Lily Cove is quite extensive, with pieces contemporary and bygone. Quite interested in getting prints of some of them for my home. The ones in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that is. Due to space restrictions, the paintings in the GBA games leave much to be desired. They're interesting to try and figure out, like the ones in Minecraft. All but 2 of the paintings share text boxes across the generations, so I thought I'd do a comparison of each one and talk a little bit about them. From Gen 3 to 6, this Pikachu-like creature on its trainer's lap changes to a Curlia. This vaguely sunflower-like painting changes to depict Roselia and other grass Pokemon. This one depicts an otherworldly landscape, later reinterpreted as Giratina in the Distortion world. These berries stay berries. The 2 decaying paintings are replaced entirely by a dramatic rendition of a Ralts and an Altaria with its trainer in an ukiyo-e-adjacent style. That's my favorite one. It kind of reminds me of all those stylized Pokemon cards that have come out in the past decade and caused all sorts of fuss in the TCG market. Of all the paintings on the first floor though, I think this one is the most interesting of all. This is a painting of a legendary Pokemon. Do you recognize it? It kind of resembles a Wobbuffet or a blue Choo-Choo from A Link to the Past, next to someone in loose clothing like a toga. You know what it changes to in the remakes? Arceus, the mythical creator god of the Pokemon universe. I guess if you kind of squint. The museum also houses art that isn't on a canvas, if that's more your style. There's this statue of an ancient bird Pokemon on display right near the front, but it looks more like a Pidgeot to me. This one brings up some questions. This is a modern-looking Pokeball said to be used in the olden days. How can that be? The timeline on the creation of Pokeballs has always been shaky, with sources ranging from several hundred years ago to Drayden's childhood to the real-life year of 1925, so I think I'll let it slide. This piece may not actually be art. From what I can gather, it's an ancient tablet that we can't read. For all we know, it may depict a how-to guide for getting yourself a Lucario? It kind of looks like a Lucario. For all we know, it may depict a how-to guide for getting yourself a Lucario that's proud of its power. It's rather out of place in the art museum. New for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is this sculpture depicting a Shroomish that looks like it's made of glass. I really want one for my desk. It's also one of the most recent additions to the museum, which brings me to the others. On the second floor is a blank gallery that we can fill up ourselves. How? By participating in Pokemon contests and inspiring artists with how well your Pokemon did. Shiny hunters know this place for another reason though, as interacting with the paintings in Pokemon Emerald is one of the ways to circumvent Emerald's broken RNG. Now as a final little tidbit, this may surprise you, but within this museum, there is a character who may have later appeared in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. If you played those games, you fought against him rather early in your career. He has a past as a struggling artist and possesses 3 items that we can purchase from this struggling artist NPC. That all leads me to believe that this guy might be Brassius from Scarlet and Violet. Kind of a stretch, considering that the art pieces aren't credited to him in Scarlet and Violet where other art pieces are, but it's so weird to me that Brassius would possess these niche items otherwise. What do you think? I think we should be moving on to the next region. The Orberg City Mining Museum doesn't have a whole lot to say. It's a museum dedicated to the history of coal mining and coal in general. As a guy who just spent a significant chunk of this video talking about water, believe me when I say that Orberg Museum is a little boring. Part of its lack of significance is how the museum is really just set dressing for the main attraction, the Fossil Resurrection Clerk. I'm a little torn on the mining museum, to be honest. On one hand, I think places like the Sinnoh Underground and the Orberg Mine itself make up for the lack of depth at this museum. On the other hand, I think Game Freak should have made the mine more expansive because of the focus on what lies underground in this region. I choose to believe that the reason why they lack any fossil exhibits in this museum is due to the guy at the counter immediately bringing them to life. They've tried to do interesting exhibits here, but the man at the counter just keeps playing God. Without that explanation, I'm kind of let down by this place. But it is just speculation. Let's go to Unova now. What sets Nacrene City's museum apart is that it also serves as a Pokemon League certified gym. Up to a point, that is. While we can challenge Lenora in Black and White by Black 2 and White 2, Lenora has retired to focus more on her curatorial duties within the Nacrene Museum. That brings to mind an interesting and recent trend among top-tier trainers. For a lot of them, being, say, a gym leader or Elite Four member is a side gig. It's rather uncommon nowadays for an expert battler to be known as just an expert battler. That both she and Bryson retire explicitly to follow passions other than Pokemon battling within the same game is interesting to me. What I'd like to say first is that the Nacrene Museum is probably the most eclectic collection of all museums in Pokemon games.
What's on exhibit is rather similar to Pewter Museum, but it appears that this museum is dedicated almost exclusively to things that Lenora and her husband study or have found. In a way, it's less about the artifacts and more about what the two have found. It comes across to me like a personal collection.
It rather reminds me of my own room, where I have a Burger King Mario ball on a shelf next to a uranium glass chalice and my iconic cowbell. I really relate to Lenora. Nacrene Museum's big ticket exhibit is definitely their skeleton of a dragon-type Pokemon, probably Dragonite.
Is it just me, or does it seem really out of place? I have seen skeletons and specimens of extant species in museums, but those museums were dedicated to wildlife and ecosystems. Imagine if a historical society in the middle of Nevada had a fully articulated Bengal tiger skeleton. One with no real historical significance, one just brought in because the curator thought it was cool.
That's what this is like to me, and I love it. Team Plasma, of course, steals the head, and we get it back for the museum. Before I wrote the script, I had the impression that this was the only instance in which we interact with the museum's collection, but we take the old amber from Pewter, and you're able to actually contribute to Lily Cove Museum. I consider that to be awesome. While indulging my curiosity about fossil Pokemon, I spotted something interesting in Ambret Town. Really makes you think. This fossilized PNG, Armaldo, is also kind of weird. It's more like the Pokemon was frozen in carbonite than fossilized. It's mostly the lack of depth that gets me. Putting aside what it looks like, this very well may be the only complete still-in-the-rock fossil in the Pokemon series. How the Aerodactyl exhibit in Pewter changes across remakes makes me eager to see what Game Freak does with this Armaldo in a hypothetical return to Unova. Will it stay a mostly complete fossilized slab? Will it become a fully articulated specimen? Or will it become something else entirely? Opposite the Armaldo fossil, is a collection of bones carried as weapons by a certain kind of Pokemon, probably Cubone or Marowak. Once again, kind of odd considering those species are alive and thriving. I would play devil's advocate and say perhaps these came from another species, an extinct species, but the Dragonite skeleton just makes me think Lenora thought they were cool, which, honestly, same. I've never used a Marowak, but I really admire it. Just above that is this ceremonial mask, which looks pretty happy. I wonder if in a remake it would be an Ogerpon mask. I say this because just across from it is a meteorite we can use to change a Deoxys' form. Time will tell if Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl exist as a precedent for which Pokemon are considered for inclusion in a remake, and whether or not Ogerpon would get in. Food for thought. The final items I'd like to discuss are the Darkstone, Lightstone, and these unreadable tablets. Given that the stones were discovered in the Relic Castle, I think perhaps these tablets also originate from that dig site. I would really love to learn more about the ancient civilizations in Unova. It has a lot of weird, underdeveloped places like that, which I love. I'd like to do a video on ruins someday. Next stop, Kalos. The Lumiose Museum is something rather special. One of two art museums in the Pokemon world, you can go on what passes as an audio tour for a fee. Because of this museum's unique guided tour, I figured it would be fitting to take you on the tour itself and provide little additional tidbits here and there. I'll provide higher quality versions of the artwork on screen where I can.
Side note, pretty much every single piece in the museum was recently revealed to be concept art for XY. High resolution versions are available, but they were procured in the recent gigantic leak, so I will not be showing them.
The courtyard of the Parfum Palace. A statue that celebrates cooperation between Pokemon and people stands in the courtyard. This work is part of a series depicting sceneries that inspired overseas artists while they were traveling in Kalos. Lavera City, a city that looks like a hideaway for fairies. A huge tree stands in the center, and the Pokemon gym is nestled in the tree. This work is part of a series depicting sceneries that inspired overseas artists while they were traveling in Kalos. Glittering Cave. It's a dark and narrow cave. The source of its eerie light is a plant called luminous moss. This work is part of a series depicting sceneries that inspired overseas artists while they were traveling in Kalos. Anastar Sundial. A sundial that shines, reflecting the setting sun. For some reason, the artist depicted the sundial reflected in a mirror. Therefore, it's reversed. This work is part of a series depicting sceneries that inspired artists from overseas while they were traveling in Kalos. Kalos Power Plant. This plant uses heat from the ground to generate electricity. This painting is part of a series on technology in Kalos.
and the plant is a sharp commentary on the hidden passion that lies just beneath everyone's surface. Kalos Power Plant. This plant uses gas from composting waste to generate electricity. This painting is part of a series on technology in Kalos, and it expresses the sorrow of wanting to leave some legacy behind, even though we pass on and disappear. Kalos Power Plant. This power plant uses fire to generate electricity. This painting is part of a series on technology in Kalos, and the fierce combustion fully communicates the passionate fire of the energy of life. Pokeball Factory. This factory makes Pokeballs and ships them all over the Kalos region. This painting is part of a series on technology in Kalos, and the ever-increasing number of Pokeballs expresses the artist's desire to be connected to all Pokemon. Shaman. The gratitude Pokemon. In certain regions, people express gratitude on special occasions, such as birthdays or anniversaries, by giving a bouquet of Gracidia flowers. This masterpiece is a moving tribute to the artist's departed mother. Mr. Briny's Compassion. This painting depicts an old man who keeps a flying Pokemon close at hand. Incidentally, the man's name is Mr. Briny, and the Wingle's name is Pico. Note: this artwork is from the card Mr. Briny's Compassion from EX Dragon. Town Volunteers. This work depicts volunteers working with Pokemon by feeding and grooming them. In addition to showing the Pokemon what they can do for them, they bring people and Pokemon closer together. Note: this art is from the Town Volunteers card, which is from Aquapolis. Fossil Excavator. It depicts a person and Pokemon excavating a fossil in the underground in Sinnoh. It captures the delightful moment of discovery. Note: this art originates from the card Fossil Excavator from Mysterious Treasures. Battle Subway. In the Unova region, the Battle Subway is a popular venue for Pokemon battles. The artist has now devoted himself to battles. This is his last known work. Forest Guardian. This painting has an amusing story. It is said that Noctowl foresees 7 different futures, mixes them together, and picks one. The fact that Noctowl can see its surroundings even in darkness is the basis of the story. Note: this is the art from the card Forest Guardian, also from Aquapolis. A painter in later years portrayed a king from 3,000 years in the past. Many of the episodes depicted in this painting differ from historical facts. For instance, we know that the king's dearest Pokemon was not at his side when he had the key to the ultimate weapon. Nevertheless, the painter's technique is outstanding. Note: this painting changes depending on where you are in the story. Before becoming champion, this wall is blank. It gets defaced during the Looker side quest. The Sea of Kalos. This piece is a key work in the rise of the realist movement. It depicts with keen accuracy the scenery in an area near Comarine City in Kalos. Farmers and Pokemon. It captures the lives of Pokemon and farmers who live together with the land. It was painted about 80 years ago and is regarded as an example of naturalism. Golurk and the Knight. This painting depicts a knight-errant who continues his travels with a Pokemon, Golurk. The painting expresses the knight's identity and his suffering as its primary subjects. It is regarded as an example of romanticism. A Man and Mew. They say a man of power at the time forced the artist to add the mythical Pokemon Mew to spread the word of how great he was. A Castle in Kalos. Around the time the Parfum Palace was built, aristocrats who served the king created unique castles in their territories. This work is highly praised as a piece that captures that period in time. A sketch of a windmill. This sketch is by an artist known to be a polymath, as in someone with a wide-ranging knowledge of painting, architecture, and civil engineering. The design of the windmill that stands in Dendemil Town today is based on this sketch. Sinnoh's Battle Frontier. The Battle Frontier is a Pokemon battle facility located in the fight area in the Sinnoh region. It consists of 5 buildings: the Battle Tower, the Battle Factory, the Battle Arcade, the Battle Hall, and the Battle Castle. Unova region. Various kinds of Pokemon and people gathered in the region, so it's like a universal melting pot. That's why this region is called Unova. Johto region. The region is full of legends and old history related to Pokemon. And thus concludes the tour. I really enjoy this place. I'm not much of an art buff, but I appreciate how much effort went into this building that I bet a not so insignificant chunk of you have never stepped foot in. And honestly, I was in that boat with you for a while. I completely forgot this place existed until I sat down to research this video. I knew there was a place that had actual card art in it, but I blended it in my mind with Lily Cove Museum's depiction in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I spent way too long trying to find the cards that matched with the artwork of Arceus and Giratina. Do you have any of the cards with art depicted in Lumiose Museum? I own a few. I think that just about does it for this place. Now, I'm going to recap and give thoughts on each of the museums before I explain what they mean to me in general. The Pewter Museum of Science is pretty good, no real reason to complain. And what sets it apart is its numerous and ever-changing depictions. It also provides a window into Game Freak's philosophy about real-world references. I give it the should not have referenced Space Shuttle Columbia award. The Oceanic Museum is perhaps the most educational, but also the least like what people imagine a museum to be like. It also shows phenomenal improvements across generations, to the point where I'd say it kind of sucked in Generation 3. I give it the
most likely to be a field trip destination award. Like its sister museum, the Lily Cove Museum of Art also shows tremendous improvement across the generations. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you can actually make out what's on exhibit and appreciate it as art. It's also awesome that they still reference it, but I'm not sure I ever recall going into it as a child. Friends I've pestered for memories while making this video also can't ever recall going into it, except for the shiny hunters, who really only knew it as a less convenient alternative to the battle video method of changing RNG seeds. For that reason, I give it the Neat Little Factoid Award. I barely had anything to say about the Orberg Mining Museum, and that was me scrounging for things to say about it for days. The main exhibit is a big slab of coal. I give it the Coal Slab Award. Lenora's Nakreen Museum is a hodgepodge of cool historic knickknacks. She just like me for real. I give the Nakreen Museum the Excellence in Eclectic Collecting Award. The Lumios Museum is a very true-to-life depiction of an art museum. There's amateurs and appreciators abound. Game Freak went all out for this place and made a place in-universe for some very cool real-world artwork. It wins the I'm underdressed and I don't know what I'm looking at award. I will be personally devastated if we don't see Lumios Museum in Legend CA. It's been about 10 years since a brand new museum was brought to the world of Pokemon. They have been appearing recently in remakes, but I choose to ignore that fact because it would mean that the Orberg Mining Museum is technically the most recent museum in a Pokemon game. Otherwise, I think Lumios Museum is a good stopping point, which brings me to the future. Going forward, apart from museums we've already seen, I would be interested in a Pokeball museum. I think it would be very cool to learn about the different steps in the development of the Pokeball. As I touched upon earlier, the actual history of the Pokeball is a little hazy. Some clarity would be well appreciated, and a museum would be both a good way to do that and in line with how tidbits have been presented to us in-universe. Regardless of where the series goes, I just hope we see more. I hold museums very dearly, and they add a lot of flavor to fictional universes that they appear in. What kind of museums would you like to see in future Pokemon games? Let me know in the comments below. There's been a mystery plaguing me since a few weeks ago when the D-Make commemorating 6.5 years since Let's Go and Pikachu and Eevee released. There's a small child inside Brock's gym in Pewter City. He makes a curious claim that evokes Han Solo's famous remark about completing the Kessel Run in 12 parsnips. He says that we are 10,000 light years from facing Brock, despite the fact that he is standing right there. I chuckled to myself and then demolished Brock with my level 12 Bulbasaur, like everyone else did. But when I got to Mountain Moon, I realized that this child would not say something like this without knowing better. Why would he hyperbolize? There's no evidence suggesting this child is capable of metaphor. Furthermore, trainers in Pokemon have to go to school. They have trainer schools, which are like high schools but for children who want to train Pokemon. Surely they would go over common units of distance such as the meter, the foot, and the parsnip. I can only conclude that this boy does in fact know what a light year is. For those who don't, it's the distance that light travels in an Earth year. That's about 5.88 trillion miles, or about a third of a parsnip. Defeating him confirms that he was aware he misspoke, but for the sake of this video, we're going to ignore that. Why would he say such a thing? I can think of 3 possible conclusions. The first is that the Brock and Pewter gym is an illusion. The second is that time and space work differently in the Pokemon universe. Let's the first. Brock is a character known to have psychic powers. His eyes are constantly closed, and so he must stretch out with his feelings to interact with the world. It's not too much of a stretch to imagine that he has other powers as well, such as teleportation and astral projection. You see, we can see Brock outside of his gym while he's supposed to be at his gym. It is possible that Brock is 10,000 light years away from Pewter Gym, exploring the cosmos and leaving doubles behind to go about his earthly business. Finally, Brock's cruelty knows no bounds, so it's possible he told this child of his true intentions just to torment him. The second possibility may involve an irregularity in the Pokemon world's orbit. Kanto in Fire Red Leaf Green is a planet in a state of perpetual daytime. In addition, this means it's never nighttime. Quite famously, Espeon and Umbreon are not able to be obtained in the Kanto region due to this. By the time we take several steps to face Brock, it's possible that we have traveled 10,000 light years since speaking to the boy. This would make sense because I said, why would he be wrong? In summary, there is something strange happening in Pewter City. This boy is a fraud, or Brock is magical. I just don't know. And the mystery is so deep and perplexing. Tune in next time for my opinion on the Ralph the Viking discourse.